Wisconsin Towns and Villages Representative, Supervisor Seefeld, Supervisor Ritter, Supervisor Shafinsky, and Supervisor Unger. Also present are Director Miskimins, Shad Harvey, our Land Resource Manager, and Garrett Poggle, our Land Use Specialist. The establishment of the ERC is required by law for purposes of administration of county ordinances and land conservation programs. This committee must follow state laws and local ordinances as written. The committee cannot change or ignore any part of the ordinances or state laws and must apply the laws as written. The purpose of this committee is to hear and decide on proposed ordinances and ordinance revisions, rezoning petitions, and provide direction on land conservation planning programs. The ERC will give a full and fair hearing to any person applying for a rezone petition. Taped recording is being made of the meeting, which will assist with preparation of written hearing minutes. Committee is interested in hearing all pertinent comments and questions. Each hearing will be opened by reading the public notice and allowing staff to present a staff report, including evidence from any on-site inspection. The applicant and anyone wishing to testify will be sworn in and allowed to give testimony. Witnesses will be called in order of those first in favor, second opposed, and then third as interested may appear. The committee may ask questions of zoning staff and applicant. It is necessary that we set a reasonable time limit on individual statements on the overall length of the hearing. To promote orderly discussion, anyone wishing to present oral testimony or ask questions relating to the hearing should state your name and present your testimony or question so it becomes part of the official record. We request you avoid repetition. Once the committee has all the necessary facts, the chairman will close the hearing, allowing no further testimony, and the committee will deliberate and decide in front of the public whether the applicant has met the standards of the ordinance. No additional testimony from the public is allowed during the deliberation. However, the committee may question staff for purposes of clarification. After a decision is made, the committee will proceed to the next hearing. Many of the decisions made by the committee are a recommendation to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, who will take up the matter at a future county board meeting. Please contact staff for more information regarding this county board process. We'll begin with item 5A1 to hear the application of Josh Prentice of REI Engineering on behalf of Larry Shore, trustee of Larry Shore Revocable Trust, General Agriculture to Farmland Preservation, Tom McMillan. And we'll begin with our staff report from Garrett. Garrett, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
All right, this is the petition of Larry Shore, petition to rezone land. Staff report, May 30th, 2023 for the Environmental Resources Committee. The petitioner is Josh Prentice of REI Engineering, located at 4080 North 20th Ave, Wausau, Wisconsin. The property owner is Larry Shore Revocable Trust at 200955 Galvin Ave, Marshfield, Wisconsin, 54449. The area proposed to be rezoned is a landlocked parcel located on the west side of the road, approximately 2,660 feet west of Galvin Avenue. The petition of Josh Prentice of REI Engineering on behalf of Larry Shore, trustee of the Larry Shore Revocable Trust, to amend the Marathon County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 17 Zoning Code, to rezone lands from general agriculture to farmland preservation as described as part of Lot 1 of Certified Survey Map number 19429, recorded as document number 1873911, formerly being part of Lot 2 of Certified Survey Map number 1852, recorded as document number 1795369, located in part of the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of the northwest quarter of the southwest quarter and the northwest quarter of the southeast quarter of Section 9, Township 26 North, Range 3 East, Town of McMillan. Area to be rezoned is the northern portion of parent parcel listed there. Public hearings. The Town of McMillan Town Board met on May 8th, 2023. Marathon County Environmental Resources Committee is meeting today, May 30th, 2023 at 3 p.m. A legal advertisement was published in the Wausau Daily Herald. Notice of the zoning change request was also sent by regular mail to adjacent property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. The existing zoning districts. Proposed zoning district is farmland preservation. The town recommendation on May 8th, 2023, the Town of McMillan Town Board recommended approval of the Marathon County's Environmental Resources Committee. Staff recommendation. The rezone meets all the zoning district standards as it relates to size, frontage, access, and dimension. The rezone also appears to be consistent with the purpose and intent of the town's comprehensive plan and as indicated by the town's resolution. Based on the information provided above, findings of fact, conclusions of law, and the town's recommendation, it appears the rezone request meets all the rezone criteria and standards for rezoning. Therefore, CPC staff recommend that the Environmental Resources Committee recommend approval to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. Should this petition be approved by the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, CPC staff recommend that the town update its comprehensive plan to reflect the zoning change.
Any questions for Garrett? All right, seeing and hearing none. Thanks, Garrett. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the proposed rezone, please either address the microphone at this time or unmute yourself at this time. Again, we're on item 5A1 for the Josh Prentice of REI Engineering on behalf of Larry Shore. Like I say, anybody wishing to speak in favor, please approach the microphone or unmute yourself at this time. Do you have anybody online for this or no? Sure. Josh, do you mind if I swear you in real quick, just so if there are any questions? So do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, your name again? Sorry.
Josh Prentice.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Are there any questions for Josh? Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right. Anybody else wishing to speak in favor? Last call. Anybody wishing to speak in favor? Seeing and hearing none. I'll call once. Anybody wishing to speak opposed to 5A1, please identify yourself at this time. And I'll call once. Anybody wishing to speak as interested for item 5A1, please identify yourself at this time. If no one else wishes to testify for this application, I am now declaring the public hearing on item 5A1 now closed. The Josh Prentice of REI Engineering on behalf of Larry Shore, trustee of the Larry Shore Revocable Trust, General Ag Farmland Perez, Town of McMillan. Hearing is now closed. Committee will now deliberate on the application, apply the standards of the zoning ordinance. I believe a motion to approve would be in order. Motion, or sorry, Supervisor Shafinsky.
I'd like to make a motion in accordance with the finding of fact, conclusions of law, and the recommendation of the town board that we approve the zoning request as identified.
Okay. Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Ritter. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. On to 5A2, Jason Flagger on behalf of Michael Kellhauser, Light Industrial to Rural Residential, Town of Marathon. Garrett.
All right, this is a petition from Michael Kellhauser, petition to rezone land, staff report May 30th, 2023 of the Environmental Resources Committee. The petitioner is Jason Flieger, 163-957 Owl Ridge Road, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54403. The property owner is Michael Kellhauser, 143-857 Packer Drive, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54401. Area proposed to be rezoned is located on the south side of the road just east of the end of Packer Drive. The petition of Jason Flieger on behalf of Michael Kellhauser to amend the General Code of Ordinance for Marathon County, Chapter 17 Zoning Code to rezone lands from light industrial to rural residential, described as Lot 3 of Certified Survey Map Number 17390, located in the fractional northwest quarter of Section 2, Township 28 North, Range 6 East, Town of Marathon. Area to be rezoned is described as Lot 1 of preliminary CSM, parent parcel number as listed. The Town of McMillan Town Board met on May 10th, 2023. Marathon County Environmental Resources Committee, I apologize, it should be Town of Marathon. Town Board met on May 10th. Marathon County Environmental Resources Committee is meeting today, May 30th, 2023 at 3 p.m. A legal advertisement was published in the Wausau Daily Herald. Notice of the zoning change request was also sent by regular mail to adjacent property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. Town recommendation. On May 10th, 2023, the Town of Marathon Town Board recommended approval to Marathon County Environmental Resources Committee. Staff recommendation. The rezone meets all the zoning district standards as it relates to size, frontage, access, and dimension. The rezone also appears to be consistent with the purpose and intent of the town's comprehensive plan and is indicated by a town resolution. Based on the information provided above, findings of fact, conclusions of law, and the town's recommendation, it appears the rezone request meets all the rezone criteria and standards for rezoning. Therefore, CPZ staff recommend that the Environmental Resources Committee recommend approval to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. Should this petition be approved by the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, CPZ staff recommend that the town update its comprehensive plan to reflect the zoning change.
Thank you, Garrett. Any questions? All right. Thanks. Moving on to public testimony. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of item 5A2, please identify yourself at this time. Okay. I think there was a Scott that had joined us. I would just say that if, offering testimony, you would need to be sworn in. So Scott, do you wish to testify?
Yes,
Okay, Scott, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And then just state your name, please, for the record.
Scotty Hepner.
All right, thank you, sir. Yeah, if you have any testimony to offer at this time, please feel free to go ahead. The committee may follow up with questions.
Yes, sir. No questions.
Oh, does anybody from the committee have any questions? No. Okay. All right, we didn't have any questions, Scott. We're good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak in favor for 5A2, please identify yourself at this time. This is the last call. Okay. Anybody wishing to speak against the proposed rezone, I'll call one time for item 5A2. Please identify yourself at this time. Seeing and hearing none. Final call, one and final call. Anybody wishing to speak as interested for item 5A2, please identify yourself at this time. If no one else wishes to testify for this application, I am now declaring the public hearing on Jason Flagger on behalf of Michael Kellhauser, Light Industrial Rural Residential Town of Marathon is now closed. The committee will now deliberate on the application, apply the standards of the zoning ordinance. I believe a motion to approve would be in order again. Supervisor Ritter.
I'll make a motion to approve the petition of Jason Flieger on behalf of Michael Kellhauser to amend the General Code of Ordinance for Marathon County Chapter 7 zoning to rezone lands from light industrial to rural residential in the town of Marathon due to town and staff recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Drabek. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. 5B, review and possible recommendations to County Board for its consideration. Town zoning changes pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 60.62 sub 3. We have none. C, review and possible recommendations to County Board for its consideration. 1, resolution to amend the 2023 County Improvement Project list to add Phase A closure Bluebird Ridge Recycling and Disposal Facility. I see we have Dave joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll just be brief. I know we have a long agenda this afternoon. You may remember last fall, we started the closure project on Bluebird Ridge Recycling Disposal Facility. It was a bit later in the year, so we didn't actually have it on last year's CIP, and we didn't add it to this year's CIP. It was actually a forced closure that the DNR came and said, if you'd like to expand your landfill, one of the conditions will actually be to close 10 acres. So last year we did the clay portion, and now we're going back in and we're finishing the remaining work. That includes geosynthetics, which is the 10 acres of plastic, the remaining dirt work, and any gas infrastructure upgrades that we need on that 10 acres to officially close that 10-acre portion. So you will have a resolution that we've taken through Solid Waste Management Board already and received approval on that. And any of the remaining paperwork should be in the packet. Open for any questions if there are any.
Did Solid Waste meet last month? Okay. All right. Any questions for Dave? Otherwise, this looks fully funded through the Solid Waste Department, so.
Yep, that is correct. We set aside, we allocate funding for closure projects much like this, and this portion will be taken from that closure account.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Seeing and hearing none, what is the wish of the committee? I think a motion to approve would be in order. Supervisor Stravinsky?
I'll make a motion to approve as outlined.
Motion has been made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Unger. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Moving on to C, review, D, review and possible action. D1, Turbot Estates preliminary plat, Town of Mosinee, and D2, Satine Acres preliminary plat, Town of Mosinee, and then, Satine Acres preliminary plat, Town of Satine. Mr. Rep King, I think you've got these. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Sorry.
So I'll go over the Turbot Estates first and the Town of Mosinee, the preliminary plat, staff report. Plat complies with Chapter 236 of the Wisconsin statutes, Chapter 87 of the Administrative Code, Chapter 18 of Marathon County Code of Ordinances. It's town zoned. It has been previously approved by the town of Mosinee. Stormwater management plan was submitted with the preliminary plat. A draft long-term maintenance agreement was included with the packet. This also included erosion control plan. And some wetland areas indicated on the plat will be disturbed and are indicated on the wetland plan. These will be accounted for. The preliminary plat is approved by the Pouts Department based on the following. There was not a standard soil test done on every lot, but there was a soil test waiver granted by the Pouts Department because of the consistency of the soils. For access, all lots will have access to improved public road which connects to County Road KK, and the Highway Department is aware of the design. Based on the information provided, CPZ staff recommend that the Environmental Resources Committee approve the proposed preliminary plat of Turbot Estates. I would like to add that as a preliminary plat, there's no signature required from anyone on the board or on the committee. It just requires committee approval in the minutes.
Okay, any questions for Dave for the town of Mosinee plat? Okay. Why don't you go ahead and just do the information, the education for the other one, and then we'll just take motions when we get done with those. Okay?
Sure.
Thanks.
This one is for the preliminary plat of Stettin Acres in the town of Stettin. The survey plat complies with Chapter 236, Chapter 87, and Chapter 18 of the Marathon County Code of Ordinances. Zoning plat is in the town of Stettin is town zoned. The area that is part of the preliminary plat is zoned RSI 140, which is a single-family resident, meets those zoning district requirements. The stormwater management plan was submitted with the preliminary plat and has been approved by the Department of Natural Resources. Erosion control plan was included with the stormwater management plan, and wetland areas indicated on the plat will not be disturbed. As far as sanitary sewer goes, the plat has been approved by the Pouts Department. The soil, I won't go over all the soil types, but there was 3 borings done on each lot, and they have pre-planned those lots for building. All proposed lots will have access to an improved public road which connects to Stettin Drive. There's 2 different names on those. The city, prior to this preliminary plat, for approval with the Environmental Resources Committee, the City of Wausau Plan Commission approved the plat on May 16th, so it will be going to their council as well. Based on the information provided, CPZ staff recommend that the Environmental Resources Committee approve the proposed preliminary plat of Stettin Acres.
So I got a couple of questions, but I'm going to start with the Stettin one. Why does that one have to go to the Wausau in addition to going in front of the town of Stettin?
Sure. Extraterritorial review. The city of Wausau exercises 3-mile radius, or
Sure.
3 miles from the boundary.
Okay. And then both the D1 and D2 went in front of the respective town boards and received approval?
I don't believe the town of Stettin has approved the Stettin Acres plat yet. It
Okay.
will be on the next board meeting.
Okay.
We don't anticipate any issues with it. I did sit with the developer through a town plan commission meeting several months ago, and they were on board with the plan, so.
If the towns weren't to, for whatever reason, decide not to approve it, I'm guessing that our decision would just be nullified then?
Well,
or-
they're siloed. The decisions are siloed, so our decision is completely separate from theirs. If any reviewing authority denies the plat, it's denied.
Oh, wow. So then they would. So if the town would deny, or for the Stettin one, if Wausau denied it, then it's denied?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Supervisor Drabek.
Sorry, I didn't.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have one here. Thank you. I'm just looking at where it says Little Brook Court, something, and they got all these different designs. Is that for runoff or what is that? There's the pictures on there. I mean, it's like a,
In the stormwater management plan?
every time I go try to get a page number, it turns upside down. Like 99, page 99.
Is that 99?
That's the picture, yeah. That would be.
So those are the typical cross-sections for the road, when they build the road. Every 50 feet typically, they'll have a cross-section, and that's the build. So you've got the ditches on either side, and then your base layers, your asphalt, everything like that is designed. That's a typical civil construction design
Thank you.
for a road.
That's all I need. I was just curious what it was mostly, so thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Supervisor Shafinsky.
I do have one question, and that is between the two projects, what are the total number of housing units that are looking to be completed ultimately?
Well, there's 9 on the Turbot Estates, and I don't recall 40. Was it 43 on the other one? In Statine Acres?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's coming up soon.
The estimate's sufficient. Just, we've had lots of discussion about housing in the county, and I was just kind of curious as to how many units we're looking at adding here. Is it 1? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Turns out it's about 50. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right. I'm still going to do two motion, or I would still request the committee make 2 separate motions for D1 and D2. I think approval would be in order. So, what is the pleasure of committee? Supervisor Shafinsky.
I will make a motion to approve 5D1 Turbot Estates preliminary plat.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Drabek. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. And then D2, please. Supervisor Ritter.
I'll make a motion to approve D2 Statine Acres.
Motion is made. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Seefeld. Any further discussion?
I think that based on the fact that the town of Statine has not approved it and our past practices, I think we're getting ahead of our headlights here, and that we should not take up the motion, nor should we approve anything before the town of Statine has done their work. Not that I'm against approving the project ultimately, I just think that proper process dictates the town of Statine does their work, then they come back, and then we do our part.
So, sure. I guess the next question I would have is then for Dave. Have there been situations in the past where we've approved it ahead of the town? And I think that's important given in light of the fact that even if the town does disapprove it, that it would nullify it ultimately. But have we done this in the past? Or
Sure. Typically, no. Typically, the committee's decision is completely separate. I would caution against that because there are towns in Marathon County that rely on the committee's decision based on the fact that the county, at CPZ, we have the knowledge, the professional knowledge to review these thoroughly. So there are towns in Marathon County that rely on the committee's decision before they'll make theirs. I've seen that.
But in the past, from what I just heard, though, is that the towns would typically make their decisions before we would make our decisions, right?
Not
No?
necessarily, no.
Oh, okay. Then my understanding changes. Okay. Supervisor Shafinsky.
As I say, and my understanding, of course, is limited, but in the scope of my limited understanding, we have in fact required the town to act before we have chosen to act. So I don't doubt that the towns taking advantage of the expertise might happen, but I'm just telling you what's been my experience as I've served on this committee.
So as far as, I guess I'd have to confirm this with Dave then. The towns would look to us for our review, and they use that as part of their decision-making? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Some towns
Okay.
have in the past. I guess that's what I'll say. I don't know that Steen will do that. One thing to note too, we do have a 90-day time period that
That's my next
statutory
question.
time period that we have to adhere to. So if we wait for the town and they don't make a decision, we could start bumping up against that. And if it goes beyond 90 days, it's approved.
Okay. Marilyn?
Do they still have to go to the city of Wausau to get approval on extraterritorial on this second?
Yes, and they already have, according to the staff report, they already did get, the City of Wausau Plan Commission did approve it on May 16th, and they are recommending approval to the council at their next meeting. And that's very similar with the town. The city's approval, the town's approval, and the county's approval are all separate.
Yep.
It's different than a rezone application.
Well, that's a condition that we place upon our decisions where we have to look at the town's decision, which influences our outcome, right? For this, it's as you said, siloed.
Correct. Each decision is separate when it comes to a preliminary plat or final plat.
So I guess in light of that, then, in staff's review of this, staff is, in the information that's been presented, staff is recommending approval of that town of Stettin plat then?
Correct.
Okay.
The final plat too, if you note on the preliminary, it will look very similar to the final plat, and all of the signatures are required on the final plat. The Environmental Resources Committee, your signature, the town signature, the City of Wausau signature. This is very similar at the preliminary plat stage, only the approvals at the board in the minutes are required. There's no signatures required on the plat because it is not recorded, the preliminary plat.
Okay. Any other discussion? Motion's made and there's a second, and seeing as there's no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Motion carries, is not unanimous. Moving on to 6, educational presentations, outcome monitoring reports and committee discussion. A, department updates, conservation planning and zoning, park rec and forestry, solid waste. 1, update on municipal incidents in Marathon County. To give the committee a little bit of background, I received a request from a committee member to review this, I think going back into the fall. I apologize that it wasn't placed on sooner, but we had a number of other items require attention since then. But I figured that now is as good a time as any to take a look at this issue. So now, Mr. Repking, I'll
Matt Repking, Conservation Planning and Zoning. I've been with the Conservation Department for about 9 years now. Some new faces on the committee, so good to see you here. So I'll just kind of give you an overview of kind of what we've seen over the last 10 years with our complaints that we receive in the Conservation Department. Marathon County Animal Waste Ordinance. Staff spends, there's several of us that spend probably 25 to 30% of our time annually on enforcement. So whether it be complaints, going out to sites, working with individuals that have complaints, there's several of us that work with this quite a bit. On average, I'll show this later, but we see right around 18 to 25 complaints a year. Not all of them are violations though. And the average time that we spend on a complaint varies anywhere from 6 hours on the low end up to 30, 40 hours on the high end. So just our animal waste ordinance, just kind of a review of it. Originally, the ordinance was written in 1985, and it really just looked at that point, construction of manure storages. Prior to that, there were several hundred manure storages built in Marathon County, and some of them were built into very questionable locations, whether it be too close to bedrock, too close to groundwater, wetlands, rivers, ponds, wells. There's still quite a few of those out there. As time goes on, we're abandoning them more and more. But there's still probably 200 to 300 of them out there. There's about 600-ish manure storages in Marathon County. Over half of them are permitted now. We're very close to it. And really the purpose of the ordinance, we really want to try to protect our ground and water resources. We're looking at human health also. And we don't want to degrade any of our water resources any more than what some of them are. One thing to remember is that the animal waste ordinance, our ordinance doesn't apply to incorporated areas. So it doesn't apply to villages or cities. They do have the choice to adopt it. They could do that through a resolution. Currently, there are no villages or cities that have adopted our animal waste ordinance. Some of the state agencies that we work with on spills, the DNR we work with on the manure spills, Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection we work with on commercial fertilizer spills, pesticide spills. Since I've been here 9 years, we've only worked with Department of Ag once on a fertilizer spill, a fairly large one north of Wausau. A farmer had a 5,000-gallon liquid fertilizer tank that burst, flowed out all over his yard by his well. So we got involved with that a little bit, but DATCAP came in and oversaw the cleanup and renovation of that site. Pesticide spills, I'm not aware of any, but I'm sure there's some that occur where DATCAP's involved with them directly. Manure spills, we're involved with quite a few of them and we work with DNR on them. So anytime we have a spill, we report it to what's called the spills hotline when it's a viable spill. And we go through a whole process with where it's located, how much was spilled. And we usually have several of those a year where they're viable spills. So this is kind of just a map of the statewide spills that occur. We received this from UW Extension, Kevin Erb. You can see over on the eastern side of the state, there's a lot more spills that are reported. And the reason for this is where a lot of our confined animal feeding operations, our CAFOs, are located. And there's mandatory reporting for them. If they don't report, they can get in trouble. Any farm is supposed to report, but a lot of the smaller farms don't generally report. You know, your ones that are your unpermitted facilities, your licensed facilities. Like it says on the bottom, it's not illegal to have a spill, but it is illegal to not report it. So you see Marathon County, like I said, about 15 to 20 per year. Where does that fall statewide? We're about fifth. If I had a guess, I would say our county probably underreports its spills probably by about half, or very close to it. That's what my guess would be from what I've seen. So we'll just go through some statistics for the county. For our complaints from 2014 to 2023, so a 10-year span, 186 complaints. 83 of them were ordinance violations, 16 DNR violations, and 87 of them were non-violations. So the non-violations, you know, those are individuals that are concerned. They may not know what the regulations are or understand the requirements, but they see something happening in the landscape that concerns them, so they call our office, report it. Then you have other ones that are family neighbor disputes. Sometimes we get caught in the middle of things, drug into it, and they try to bring us out to remediate something that we can't regulate. Other times there's civil matters, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit more. And then there's the right to farm law in Wisconsin, and that's not regulated, non-regulated. So complaints where there's no jurisdiction, Wisconsin's right to farm provides farmers with protection from nuisance lawsuits, allowing them to practice agriculture without fear of legal action as long as they're following good production practices. So that's kind of a key, is good production practices. There's always going to be noise, odors, smells associated with farms, lights, hours of operation. You know, when it comes into planting season like we're in now, some of these guys go around the clock to try to get things in the fields, get things planted. Same with harvest. You know, they're going around the clock. They're protected that way. You know, they have to make hay while the sun shines, essentially. We have a good window now, so that's why they're out doing what they do. Some complaints are civil matters. So when we're talking about civil matters, we're talking about damming up waterways, flow paths, backing water up, causing flooding. That's not something that our ordinance covers, but that's actually a civil matter, that type of damage. We've received complaints about people cutting down trees on fence lines, damaging fence lines, again, that's a civil matter. So over the 10 years, the breakdown of what our violations are, essentially there's 19 of them that were manure runoff. So that could be from manure feedlots. You know, they have cattle on a feedlot, it's a dirt lot, concrete lot. Manure is discharging to a road ditch, to a stream. Manure applications on fields, that would be another source of runoff. So they apply manure on a field, we got a rain event, it runs off the field into a road ditch stream. And then stacking sites are another place where there could be runoff. A lot of these stacking sites that I've seen in the past 10 years are kind of in questionable locations. They're not necessarily in a good spot in a field. They're on the edge of a field located near a wetland, close to streams. When we could get a rain event, or if it's manure that's a little bit soupier, that stuff is running off the field. Another thing is we have about 15 unpermitted manure structures. So that would be things that are makeshift manure storage where they're digging potholes in the ground to store manure. They're making makeshift manure storages out of square bales out in fields. There's a lot of different things that we see where they try to make a manure structure to store manure and it doesn't hold up well over time. And we end up with a mess where things discharge into streams, creeks, rivers, ditches on other people's properties. For manure storages, ones that were permitted or unpermitted in the county that were built, we have a few that overflow over top every year. This year we had a few that were getting close, but they were able to get out in the fields and get things applied. We also have what's called a maximum operating level in a manure storage, and this is for engineered structures. It's usually within about 16 inches of the top, 16 to 24 inches. You don't want to exceed that level because that level is set at that, because if we have a rain event, there needs to be some room in there for that rain event to go in, and we're not overtopping the pit. And then kind of the last ones are over application, so just applying too much on fields, more than the crop can use or it runs off. Manure spills, we've had a few where tankers roll over in ditches. Somebody hit a valve accidentally down the road on a manure tanker, emptied on the road in the ditch. There's been a few different ones that I can remember. And then we've had a few over the past several years where more people have been concerned about soil erosion. So when we go by some of these fields and we're seeing gullies out there that are several feet deep, several feet wide, people are letting us know about them, and we're working with those landowners to either establish grass waterways in some of those areas, or working with them to change their rotations, their cropping systems to try to get erosion minimized. So just a quick review of our enforcement process. Our goal is always compliance. And to do that, we use what's called a stepped enforcement process. First notice, we usually have 3 different notices that go out. We have a first notice, which is either just by direct contact or written notice. A second notice is a little more formal. That one includes a written notice with the citing of what the violations were. At this point, if it is a serious violation, we can issue a citation to try to get compliance. And we also have usually deadlines in this second notice that tells people of what we want to try to achieve things by. So we work with the landowners to set goals that are realistic of meeting these dates. A third notice, this can again be a citation if the first citation didn't receive compliance. And again, it's very similar to the second one where we have some deadlines in it. For violations that are what we consider egregious or serious, we can either have an immediate citation, or if it's something that happened over several weeks, let's say if a manure storage was allowed to overtop for several weeks, then we go to a long form summons and complaint, and it would be daily fines at that point. We've had a few of those in the county. So just a couple things to remember. An acre inch of water is about 27,000 gallons. So when we're looking at an acre, which is about 43,500 some odd square feet, if we look across that acre, 1 inch of water is about 27,000 gallons. A lot of manure that's applied in Marathon County is liquid manure, and that's applied at a rate of 5,000 to 12,000 gallons per acre. So anywhere from less than a quarter inch up to a half, that's kind of our standard application rates. And this usually meets a good portion of our crop requirements for growing corn. Sometimes you'll hear rates that are a little bit higher than that, but once you kind of exceed that 12,000 gallons per acre, essentially you're going to have to inject or incorporate that manure, because that 12,000 gallons is kind of our loading limit for the surface for manure, and anything higher than that has a higher potential to run off when it's applied. Another thing is Marathon County is number 2 in the state for cows. We have about 63,000 milk cows in the county, and they produce about 640 million gallons of manure in a year. So that's a significant amount of liquid manure that's going out there. We have about 300,000 acres of cropland. But not all those acres of cropland are utilized for manure applications. So here's just an example of a field application site. Pretty low rate of manure, actually, 5,000 gallons per acre. However, the farmer applied it at a bad time of year. He applied it, or a bad time prior to a rain event. So he applied the manure, it rained the next day, 3/4 to an inch of rain. Manure almost all ran off the field into the Big Old Plain Creek, or Big Old Plain River. You can see where the field is here. It was only 100 feet, not even, within the river. Pretty much all discharged right into the river. This was back in 2010, I believe. Landowner received a citation from DNR, several $100, and there was some enforcement through our office also. Here's an example of just a makeshift manure storage in a field. He used solid manure mixed with hay to make the berms around the outside. In the middle, he put a slurry, pretty low solids content, 15%, so it'd be like a thick milkshake, if you could think of that, in the middle. It rained. The driveway here is connected right to the gravel road in the ditch. All that rainwater ran into there, blew out the back of the berm, ran right down into a stream. Manure storage overflow, you couldn't see this one from the road, but when you actually went up to the manure storage, you could see it on the backside. This was in April. Pit was getting pretty full to the top. You can see this is actually an engineered and designed storage, so there's a maximum operating level. I went out to this site. By the time I got out there, we received the complaint. The farmer was already agitating the pit and applying some on the fields to get it down. It was a rough spring. There wasn't too many windows to get things out. Field conditions weren't very good. He was afraid that if he applied it on the fields and we received rain, it would run off. He just waited a little bit too long to get some out of the storage. So we worked with him on some fields, and his agronomist worked with him too to try to identify fields that were the safest for him to apply on. So kind of the first step for a lot of these farms is nutrient management and cost sharing nutrient management. In Marathon County, we have about 60% of our acres that are under nutrient management plans. Is everybody on the committee aware of what a nutrient management plan is? Nutrient management plans essentially look at what our crops are, what our cropping rotation is, and our tillage, and then what nutrients we're putting out there to meet our crop needs. So it's kind of a plan of, are we putting enough out there or not enough to meet our crop needs for what we're applying either in manure or commercial fertilizer. The other thing our nutrient management plan looks at is how much soil loss we're losing over our rotation. So if we're doing, like, let's say, a lot of soybeans in our rotation, soybeans are pretty highly erodible. We're not putting out a lot of residue. They don't have a good root system. There's a lot of potential there to lose soil, especially if we're using aggressive tillage. By aggressive tillage, I mean moldboard plowing, if we're chisel plowing. Tillage that's deep dislodges a lot of soil, reduces the amount of residue that's on the surface. There's a high potential for soil loss. Now, if we're doing things that are minimizing that loss, soil loss and nutrient loss, reduced tillage, if we're having longer hay rotations or leaving residue on that surface, those are things that are good that, are conserving our soil. So essentially a nutrient management plan is really a budgeting plan, both for our soil, for our erosion, and for the nutrients that we're putting out there. About 60% of acres in Marathon County have nutrient management planning. And we receive an annual pot of funds that it's about $100,000 a year from Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection to cost share nutrient management. In the past, we've always tried to target the people that had manure storages that were built before 1985. Those were the ones that were not required to have nutrient management because they weren't permitted through our ordinance. The ones that we're permitted, we're required to have nutrient management as part of their permit. When we do it, we make an official offer of cost share to them, and then they're required to have nutrient management plan. If we use just the state funding that's left each year, it'll take about 50 years for us to get all cropland acres under nutrient management planning in Marathon County using Department of Ag cost share. Really, nutrient management plans are just a starting point, and following the plans are kind of the second step in it. There's a lot of plans that are out there in Marathon County, and there's a pretty good portion that are probably followed, but there's also a portion that aren't followed. The plan that sits on the shelf, and that's where it is after it's written. We also have funds that support nutrient management. We have funds for cover crops, no-till or reduced till. By reduced till, I'm saying tillage that meets at least a 30% crop residue on the surface. So if we go out to a field after it's been planted, we pull a 10-foot tape. There's at least 3 spots where we're seeing residue. That's what we're looking for. We do go out on farms and do residue checks. And then for grass waterways, there's been a lot of grass waterways over the last 10 years that have been taken out either by spraying or they filled in over time. And people have just tilled through them because they're not functioning as they should. Usually you end up seeing those in a field. They end up being gullies that form over time. Marathon County also offers courses for writing their own nutrient management plans to help offset those costs. So they don't necessarily, a farmer doesn't have to pay an agronomist. They can also come through our classes. We teach them every January and February. We usually have anywhere from 40 to 70 farmers come through. We work with 4 other counties in the area and North Central Tech College to get these plans. The funding that we receive from the Department of Ag to fund these courses pays for the class tuition, portion of soil sampling, and also manure sampling.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm going to cover the last couple of slides. Don't you guys love Matt's super thick Stratford accent? The more I hear him present, I'm just like, gosh, that is a good North Central Wisconsin accent. That's why the farmers love him. So thank you for this opportunity to talk to you guys today. I just have to say before I cover these just last couple of slides, it is so heartening that there was a request to hear a little bit more about where we're at with manure spills and, you know, kind of the direction that we're going. We appreciate you sticking with us as we put you guys through manure boot camp. You get all the goodies on this committee. You get the solid waste. You get the manure spills. What a delight you have. So just kind of, you know, looping back to Matt was talking about with nutrient management. So, you know, we certainly recognize the value in working with our producers at looking at the amounts of either commercial fertilizer or manure that they're applying to their fields and how that's affecting both our groundwater and our surface water. So this year we wanted to be very selective with how we're going to be targeting both our funds for nutrient management and then also just the manpower that we put behind it. The staff time that we spend on nutrient management probably far exceeds the amount of money that we spend on it, just because this is where we really see it as the bridge that's connecting, you know, us to the farmers in many ways. And so this year and into next year, we're going to be using a lot of our nutrient management money to offer cost sharing to producers where we're starting to see kind of those high nitrate areas pop up around the county. Those obviously have been there in the past, but as we step further into our groundwater study and we start testing wells, we'll obviously become more aware of where some of those kind of hot spots are, with what we're calling them anyway. Even just with county citizens hearing in the news about the groundwater study that's unfolding, we've actually been seeing quite a bit of increase in people contacting us in the conservation department. People are beginning to be curious about, you know, what the status of their well is and if they should have it tested. And as they get it tested and oftentimes are seeing things like high nitrates, we're able to work with them already and kind of see what's going on in the fields around their house and then begin to reach out to some of those producers. We're also going to be targeting the Fenwood Creek watershed in our nutrient management outreach. And so one thing that's really neat that we're doing this year is both Matt and then also one of our coworkers, Kirk Langfoss, they're both CCAs or certified crop advisors, and that's that's the designation that you need to be able to write an official nutrient management plan. Normally out in the private sector, people have to pay just buku bucks to get these plans written, but Kirk and Matt have offered to write those for free for landowners in the Fenwood Creek watershed, which saves them thousands of dollars. Not only are those plans being offered to be written for free, but we're also able to offer them $40 per acre in cost sharing to get that initial nutrient management plan in place. And so it's really a goal of ours to see that we know what's happening on the acreage in the Fenwood so we can continue to cultivate data in that watershed that we're focusing a lot of time and energy on as well. So it's my understanding that one of the main reasons we're having this conversation today is that we not only want to get a better idea of where we're at with manure management in the county, but we also want to just have the beginning of a discussion of how we can maybe move the needle with manure management in Marathon County. You know, if we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always gotten, right? And so we've started to have some of these conversations as we've taken a dive into the aerator conversations that we all went through with the Big O Plain, and we talked about, you know, why is there a problem with phosphorus in the Big O Plain and why do we need the aerators? And we've seen graphs like the ones on the screen showing all of the years that there's been fish kills within the Big O Plain watershed. So and we are a very unique county. Western Marathon County and Eastern Clark County actually has the largest concentration of dairy farms in the world. So that's a big burden to carry. Like, we should feel that weight on our shoulders when we walk into these meetings and when we walk into our workplaces every day, because it's a tremendous responsibility. And it's also our responsibility to protect the surface waters, groundwater of our county, and it becomes very complex as all of these things come together. And so as I've been trying to dive a little bit into the many studies that have been done on the Big O Plain watershed and on the Fenwood Creek watershed within my first year of being here at Marathon County, it's really interesting to read through all the studies that have been done. And this is just one that I wanted to bring to your attention today. The DNR did a multi-year study that was published in 2009. And Mark Hazaga of the DNR had studied the Big O Plain flowage and then also the Spirit flowage, which is up by Tomahawk. And he used the Spirit flowage as a reference point since there's really not agriculture occurring there. It's all, you know, protected state natural area. And so he looked at the bacteria concentrations in the water during the spring runoff time period, so when the snow is melting. And when he compared the Spirit flowage and the Big O Plain flowage, he found that bacteria was 7 times higher in our Big O Plain flowage than it was in the Spirit. And what was most impactful for me to read was that the BOD, or the biological oxygen demand that was found in the Big O Plain, that was 14 times greater than the raw sewage that was entering into the Wausau wastewater treatment plant. So BOD is what they use to measure effluent and things in wastewater treatment facilities. So what was running through the Big O Plain was 14 times higher than the untreated raw sewage entering the Wausau wastewater treatment facility. So that right there is telling me that, you know, we really do have a problem, and especially that data did not include Freeman and Fenwood Creek watersheds. So those are 2 small Huck 12 watersheds within that the Big O Plain watershed, which takes up most of Western Marathon County. So there's 11 small watersheds about the size of the Fenwood. So 2 of our watersheds that produce the most pollutants were not even included in that study. So it's probably much higher. In a similar study that came about the plan in 2017 that was called Strategies for Reducing Fish Kills in the Big O Plain Reservoir, it went through different recommendations that were put forth by Marathon County, by Clark County, by the Big O Plain citizens organizations, by about these 20 different partners that came together to produce this plan. And one of the main goals of the plan was to support development and implementation of measures that reduce nutrient and organic matter loading to the Big O Plain. So we've been supporting measures, right? You guys support our conservation department. We support nutrient management planning. The ERC supports the enforcement strategies that we seek through CPZ. And so we have been doing that. But at the same time, we're not necessarily supporting the development of ways to reduce the nutrient loads entering the Big O Plain. So in this plan, there had been about 10 different things that we're supposed to be doing over the next decade. And some of these on the screen we already have been doing. So things like developing and implementing a Fenwood Creek pilot project. You've all heard about that. That has been happening actively. We have been providing financial support of annual operational costs of the aerator. We have a recreation management plan. We have been promoting technologies to distribute livestock waste, all of these things, but we haven't really dove into ways to minimize or eliminate winter land surface spreading as well. And so in looking at that study and looking at what Marathon County agreed to do in the plan that had come out about a decade ago, that is likely an area that we should migrate towards having some type of discussion as a committee. Obviously, we're learning with more and more data that we're seeing the majority of the phosphorus loading in the Big O Plain watershed coming in those winter melt-off months, in the spring melt-off months. So that's one area where I would love to have further discussions with you all on how we can work together to stop what we're seeing happening in the winter months. And we're doing that because we have these goals here on the screen. These are our strategic plan goals. We want to be the healthiest county. We want to be the safest county. And our water resources goal says that we want them to be the highest quality for the safety of residents and for the health of our aquatic ecosystems. And so I would love to see a Big O Plain reservoir that's safe enough for people to swim in. I would love to bring my kids there and let them play in the water and not be afraid for what might happen if they go in the water. And I'm sure you guys would say the same things for your families as well. So thank you so much for listening to kind of where we're at with this and what the future could bring. But I'm very encouraged by the discussions we've already begun to have and talking about the Big O Plain and the Fenwood and the reservoir as well. So with that, Matt and I are very happy to take any questions that you would have.
Okay, so I have a couple questions, and I'll start with the one that you just sparked. Did you just imply that the Big O Plain Reservoir at times is not suitable or considered suitable for safe swimming activities?
Yeah, well, the health department does monitor it, and on all of our public beaches in Marathon County, they do keep that up to date. Certainly there are times of the year where it is safe, and certainly there are times of the year where it is unsafe, and that's common everywhere in Wisconsin, not just Marathon County. It fluctuates a lot with rainfall events, with temperatures. There are a lot of factors, but more often than not, that reservoir is not considered healthy to swim in.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's an interesting data point. What I'd like to get at here, and I don't know that you're going to have specific answers, and I understand that. But pardon my background, but I'm an engineer, so flowery, well-intentioned phrases, while they sound wonderful, at the end of the day, I'm an engineer. I like to see data. And sometimes data can be hard to come by. But with all the efforts that have gone into trying to change some of the culture, which has certainly pre-existed your department's efforts. So it's, the culture of farming has been here a lot longer than we have been. But do we have any data on just how much impact we have made relative to some of the manure management practices in terms of the impact on both groundwater and subsurface water, resources? Do we have any data that gives us an impact number that we can look at, other than just kind of it feels good to be trying to do that?
Mm-hmm. There are a couple things that come to mind. Should I go first and then? Okay. I'll give my thoughts and then Matt can share his because Matt is a data master. So I too appreciate data, and lucky for us, the Big O Plain watershed and the Fenwick Creek watershed inside of it are two of the most studied watersheds in Wisconsin. So we have lots and lots of data and reports. This is just touching the surface of a lot of this. One thing we do every other year in Marathon County is a transect survey. So there are data points all around the county, and we have various staff take, I think it takes about 2 weeks in total to drive around the county, and there is a survey of the same fields every year that shows soil erosion getting worse or better, what type of cropping systems are there, so we can, over time, we're seeing trends like, we're seeing more corn and beans now than we were, when there was grazing 20 years ago, things like that. So we're seeing lots of trends that provide us with a lot of useful data. Our nutrient management data is also a very good indicator of where we're sitting in terms of how much manure we are having to incorporate into cropland in the county over time. And it also is a very good provider of data of soil tests in the county. So when we see things like phosphorus and nitrogen in soil tests going up over time, it's telling us that we're also probably seeing things like, more manure and fertilizer being spread. So we have all of those data points available to us as well. We also have a very active farmer group, which we've talked about before, EPIC, the O Plain Partnership Group. And so they are also holders of data on what the farmers that are active in the Big O Plain watershed are doing to try to shift the culture towards conservation. And so I don't have those numbers with me today, but they do have very good numbers on how many acres of cover crops and no-till and many other things they've accomplished over about the last 5 years. Do you have anything else that comes to mind, Matt? Trying to think. Yeah. With pouts? Oh, sure. Yeah, Lori was just mentioning, we've talked a little bit about the pounds of phosphorus we're trying to reduce in the Fenwood Creek watershed. Again, that smaller
Remember,
watershed.
the entire county, not just one corner.
Yeah. So that was just for the Yeah, right. The eastern side of the county, we tend not to have as much agricultural data for it because it's a little bit of a different community, If there's a specific type of data you'd be interested, we could certainly try to.
Specifically, what I'm looking for is water quality, and can we point, and again, now I'm going to embarrass myself because I'm going to reflect back on the Wisconsin River. Mm-hmm. And having been a lifelong resident, I can tell you anecdotally that the water quality of the Wisconsin River has improved dramatically in the past 40 to 50 years. Mm-hmm. 50 years ago, I would not have gone swimming in the Wisconsin River for anything. Mm-hmm. Thank you, but no thanks. Mm-hmm. Today, that's usually not an issue. But the question I was trying to get to is, do we have data going back 5, 10, 20, 30 years where we can look at and say, because of these programs, we have improved the water quality within Marathon County. And I'm not asking to try and throw stones or anything. I think these are good things to do, but I'm looking to try and put some hard data to what we're doing so that we can measure effectiveness.
Right. I understand that. Our Marathon County Land and Water Resource Management Plan, which is on our website, you can even just Google those words and it's the first link that comes up. It does have a lot of those key facts and figures in because we are required to update that legally every 10 years. So that plan specifically tells how we have used all of our cost sharing money and the majority of our staffing hours over the last 5 to 10 years. And it also goes into how much progress we have made with those specific conservation practices. So it'll say things like Marathon County has installed 100 manure storage facilities. We have done, those key metrics that are in it, but the DNR is who typically has been in charge statewide for testing our streams, rivers, and lakes, not county conservation departments. There is no funding available for counties to do that. We right now are monitoring the Fenwood Creek and then a few of its tributaries, just out of the little bit of kind of spare change that we have from various grants. Now, if you go back about a decade, the DNR was monitoring a lot of those water bodies a lot more frequently. And now it's kind of pivoting to citizen science monitoring. So we have people, out at the Big Old Plain Reservoir that are volunteers that go out on a boat and use a Secchi disc, a black and white disc, to see how far they can go down before they see the disc. And we have about 25 volunteers in Marathon County that monitor our streams for us. Our department started that program this year for the first time ever. It's called the Water Action Volunteers Network. And that's kind of the replacement that the DNR funds for, 10, 20 years ago. There used to be probably 5-10 times more stream biologists in Wisconsin than there are now. So we used to have a lot more data, but unfortunately we just don't have a lot of current data. Most of our streams in Marathon County have not been monitored since the 1990s. And so all we can do is give you data based on the amount of money that we're getting from state and federal dollars to implement conservation. If it is the desire of this committee or the county board to collect further data on our water bodies, we are happy to do that. We just do not have a funding source for that. So if that were to be provided for us, we would be more than happy to collect that data on an annual basis.
Does that answer your question, Supervisor Shervitsky?
Well, I think the answer is we don't have the data, and you haven't been in a position to collect the data for quite some time. So
I would confirm what I heard as well.
There isn't an answer, which is disappointing, but that's kind of the construct that we're living in. So, and I don't know that we would be in a position to change that. But thank you for attempting.
Yeah, I mean, in the strategies for reducing fish kills in the Big Old Plain, I promise it's a very interesting read. If you ever just want to read it, again, you can Google it. It has, I'm not going to call it data, it has visions in there of what the future could be if we implemented certain practices. So one of the most striking statements in there is if we eliminated winter spreading in the Big Old Plain, we would see the water clarity in the Big Old Plain Reservoir increase by 20 feet in 10 years. 20 feet deeper you could see down. That's incredible to me. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up today, because I really feel like if we wanted to move the needle on our surface water in Marathon County, we really can't keep doing what we've always done. I mean, we can certainly keep asking the county board for money for aerators to keep fish alive and, one of our most prized fisheries in Wisconsin. We can do things like that, and we can keep working with what we've got. But at the end of the day, I think we all want to get to a point where at the end of our careers, at the end of our service to the county, we want to be like, I changed that for the better. I made that safer for people of this county. It's a better place because of what I helped contribute to.
I guess my just general comment would be that it sounds like the actual data collecting infrastructure is a lot different when we're looking at one section with the Old Plain in the county compared to the rest of the county. And I guess I would just say to the rest of this group, I would, be for data collection, of course. I will just ask, though, there's no requirements from the state of Wisconsin or the federal government for us to do active monitoring on all the bodies of water within our county.
Right.
So, you'll see further down the agenda, we have to have this discussion about what's mandated. And, I think there's conversations that we can have about there's community opportunities that we could rely on for data collection. But I guess just to highlight Supervisor Shervitsky's point that, we're working with rather limited optics as far as, how the county can continue to monitor that because of lack of resources. But other questions? Supervisor Drabek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess part of my question has to do with an emergency response by the farmer himself. Okay, do you have a sheet for him? Okay, if a tanker tips over, what do I do? Okay, or to be planning for that, do I have a skid steer on hand that I can seal up an area a little bit so it doesn't run into a creek. Is there anything like that that you guys have that you send them that they say, okay, if you print this out or whatever, you can have it in your tractor. That way it's for a quicker response.
Some of the newer haulers, the custom guys, they have items like that. Certain farms are required to have emergency plans like that, but we don't send out an emergency response to everybody in the county. When farmers call in, spills, every situation's different, and then one of us that are on staff try to talk them through situations, and then we always go out to the sites and work with them on it. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it, but every situation calls for a different response.
So I guess I'm asking, there could be several hours of runoff going on with that maybe they could have stopped or at least confined a little bit. That's what I'm asking here, I guess. If they would have if there's, maybe they need to have let's say a moldboard plow and they can plow it so it doesn't run so fast. And I know you don't like moldboard plows, but I'm just throwing that idea out there. It'll be rusty. It'll be rusty when they.
We did send out a few years ago to everybody had animal waste storage. Just kind of a basic things that they can do during spills. Like make berms. But it's been several years since we sent one of those out. Now that's something we could potentially send out again. We don't have what I would consider a complete list of everybody in the county that has livestock.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
We have the people that are permitted with animal waste storages, the ones that we think have animal waste storages. We have a list from DATCAP that has all the milk producers. But are we reaching everybody that handles manure? Probably not. Are we reaching the majority of them? 80, 90% probably. And there, like you said, there's basic things people can do, make berms, try to contain it, bales, a lot of those different things.
Did you have a follow-up, Supervisor?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is there a way, so I guess, because I'm unfamiliar with that part of agriculture, but are these people that experience these spills, do they already have that knowledge of what to do when that takes place? Or are they going to be in a situation where they're going to be trying to call somebody and say, hey, what do I do when this comes up? I think that's what Supervisor Drabeck might be getting at a little bit, which is that when you have that, the moment, right? Like, do they know to call that manure spill hotline, or do they know to call the county? Like, I guess, and I'm talking for everybody too, not just the people that have those MOAs.
The majority of them that I've worked with, I feel like do.
Okay.
Yeah, there's always going to be a few that they're kind of in shock when something happens.
Yeah.
Like the guy that rolls the manure tanker over on the road and the tractor's rolled over in the field.
Yeah. In that moment, they're not going to be thinking about cleanup. They're probably thinking about their own personal safety.
Well, that's what you always deal with first.
Yep.
Is everybody safe on scene?
Yep.
Manure cleanup's secondary to human safety.
I think it's more of a, and again, Supervisor Drabeck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of it more of it like a communication piece where it's like, if they do have somebody that experiences this, do they know the next steps, right? And from what you're saying here, it sounds like they do.
I'd say a lot of the manure that's hauled in the county now is hauled by custom applicators. And a lot of custom applicators go to training or are certified at the state level.
Okay.
So they're being trained on, responses to spills, over applications in fields, those sort of things. But where we become involved is when we get complaints called in.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's harder to track down who's responsible and to find them so they can begin the cleanup process. And that's been some of those cases where that's happened. I mean, I've built a berm out in a ditch. Took a shovel, threw it off the gravel road, built a berm so manure isn't running down the ditch until I can find out who operates that field and we can get them out there to clean it up.
And a lot of the calls we get are not from the landowner themselves. It's just by someone that sees something going on.
Driving by.
Yeah, and they'll call office. So even if someone is like delayed in calling us, a neighbor or someone that's watching will call us. I mean, Matt just got a call the other day. Someone was like screaming on one, like, you got to get out here, yeah! And it was like, slam. That's like, what just happened? Where do I even go? You know, so people call in a variety of ways. And the folks that have a nutrient management plan, they do have an emergency plan in the back of their plan, whether they reference that or not, but at one point they should have thought about what their plan is. And so, you know, as soon as that manure spill hotline is called to, our staff, typically Matt, is out there in minutes, not hours. So that's just always the top priority. It's always within the hour. If we get a call, we have one staff member out on site at minimum, so.
The last comment I'll make to that is that if you do type in Marathon County manure spill on Google, the very first thing that pops up is the animal waste and nutrient management information page. So they would have the tools there necessary, or at least I would suppose they do, because you have the complaint line and then that manure spill hotline for the DNR. So I'm assuming too, if a producer had no idea, they could just call that hotline and they would be able to get connected. Okay.
100%.
Anybody that calls into the DNR spills hotline, Kirsty and I are notified about it.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Last, oh, go ahead and then I'll ask mine.
All right, sorry. Are these people that call in, does that person who had the spill know who called in?
No, they can remain anonymous.
They can remain anonymous?
Yes.
Because it used to be they couldn't. I didn't believe anyway that.
No, they can remain
Okay,
anonymous.
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. One final question. So one of our overarching goals is to reduce the pounds of phosphorus. Pardon me for my ignorance, but the only way I'll get smarter is if I ask. Do we have a preference between manure spreading versus commercial fertilizer? You know, and maybe I'm not the only person on the committee that's new to this that doesn't know, but is there a preference in the direction that we would like to see producers go?
Kind of a tricky question.
So commercial fertilizer, phosphorus use in the county has gone down as we've gone along in the years here. Phosphorus is a expensive fertilizer, and people aren't going to put it out there if they don't have to. And we've seen that with a lot of fields where guys are applying commercial fertilizer and that's all they're applying. You know, soil test levels are decreasing. Now, where manure is being applied, that's a different story. Those values continue to creep up over time. And depending on what type of manure it is, some of it can be pretty high in phosphorus. So that's why if we can work with the people that are applying manure, that's probably where our biggest bang for our buck is in reducing phosphorus loss over time.
I have a question. Is it, if you have the animals, you have to get rid of the manure. And so that's a asset that you have. You want to get rid of that first before you start having to buy stuff, because you know with those animals, that has to be gone. I mean, you just can't stockpile that. So if you're a smart farmer, you're going to use what is available. And if you don't have enough manure, then you go to the commercial.
Go ahead.
And that's where a nutrient management plan helps them out, because it helps them with that budgeting portion of it, that they can use the manure up first, you know, spread that out where they need it on the fields that are lower in phosphorus, or they get the most bang for their buck. And then they come back through later on and they supplement their commercial fertilizer. But now, is that always the case? Probably not. Some of them aren't going to necessarily haul to their farthest fields away that are the lowest. They're going to haul to the fields that are closer because it's cheaper. To try to they see it as a waste product, they're going to try to dispose of it, essentially. And that's where we see over applications and fields that are high in phosphorus.
But a phosphorus reduction is a phosphorus reduction. So, and right now we're only tracking that very, very closely in the Fenwood Creek watershed as our pilot watershed. But you're right, if someone is reducing phosphorus fertilizer and not just manure, we're counting that towards a phosphorus reduction. So reduction is a reduction either way. But doing those nutrient management plans for the first time, people often realize how much money they can save after you do a soil test and see what your phosphorus value is, and you plug that into this beautiful little system that the University of Wisconsin created just for us Wisconsin residents. And then they can see, oh my gosh, I'm totally over applying fertilizer on this field. I can save thousands of dollars. I don't need to be applying that much. So it's a beautiful thing when that happens. Love to see it.
As to I guess my question I wanted to ask is in regard to the nutrient management plan writings for the producers with the Fenwood. You had mentioned a point that they were being offered for free to those producers. I guess my question is that what would be the non-Fenwood Creek producers in that situation? What are they tasked with doing? Do they have to do that all themselves, or where does that cost get bore?
There's a freeway for them too.
Yeah, they can always come through our class.
Okay.
Yeah.
They can come through our class. They have to come through once every 4 years. It's through NTC. They get paid to attend the class, and they get paid a stipend for completing the class. And they offset soil test sampling by about 75 to 80%. So essentially, that's the way that it's just their time is what it comes down to. There's about 40 to 60 some odd farmers that come through per year. There's some that come every year, even though they don't have to. But there's probably 140 to 150 farmers that write their own plans in the county out of a total of 600. Some of them just don't want to deal with having to write a plan, so they just pay an agronomist to do it.
Sure.
Or they don't have the time.
Sure. Okay, any further questions? All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Appreciate the information. Shad, why don't you bring those signature sheets down? Thank you. So we're going to keep moving on here, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to have these decision sheets be passed out to everybody. You can sign them now. Then we'll keep going through the meeting here. So for the next item on the agenda, we've got, oh, maybe I'll just, sorry. Okay. All right, here we go. 7, policy issues, discussion and potential committee determination. A, letter to Governor Evers and the Wisconsin legislature in support of more local environmental control. And that one's me. So to give the committee a little bit of background, I trust you all have reviewed the letter already. If not, you have an opportunity to do so right now. A couple weeks ago, I was thinking about some of the challenges, not just in this term, but really in the course of, my experience on this board over the last several terms. And, we've had a number of residents come to us on a couple of different issues and really request that their local governments be able to address certain things. And I think what we oftentimes run into is we're in situations where the state essentially says that for the sake of universal industry regulation, we're going to, restrict or limit the local control that's available for local governments, rather than trust those local governments to develop their own solutions to address the problems that come up in their communities. And in light of that, I identified 3 areas where I've seen situations like this come up, or at the very least I've heard of situations like this come up, which is in regards to the regulation of metallic mining, specifically with exploration, the ability to site wind turbines, and then lastly for concentrated annual feeding operations. So those 3 areas you'll see addressed in this letter. And really, I wanted to bring this forward after the last year or so because a number of members of the public have been asking for more local input in a lot of these issues. And as their representatives, I think that we all have to be leaders and figure out ways that we can try and communicate that message when appropriate. And I think this letter does, not to toot my own horn with my writing or anything, because there probably are. There might be issues with this, but I just feel like this is a way that we as officials can exercise something that's within our authority, do something that's legal, cost effective, to try and further the interests of our communities. So a number of, like I said, members of the public have asked for something like this in some shape or form. and a couple of county board supervisors have inquired for something similar. I want to highlight one more thing before we can open this up for general discussion. I want to make it clear that, this letter isn't an ask to expand local government at all. All this is a request to the state to fix some of these problems that they've created. That's all I'm asking for here. And for the people to have a say as to what goes on in their communities. Two notes I want to just make here for staff if this letter gets out of the committee here, because I would ask for the committee's support before we bring this to the executive committee. If you can go down to the last paragraph where it says, "Thank you again," strike the word "again," because I didn't thank them at all preceding that in this letter. And then strike out Kurt Gibbs, County Board Chair. I'd like that replaced with Marathon County, the Marathon County Board of Supervisors. And I would like signature lines for each of the 38 members of the county board to be on the next side or the next page of that letter so that all the members of the county board could sign. But as far as where this came from, like I said, I penned this. I worked with our corporation counsel as well as members of staff to put this together. I tried to make this as ready for prime time as possible before I brought it to you all today. So if there's any comments, questions, amendments, please feel free to offer them at this time. But that's really why I wanted to bring this forward. So, I don't want to hog the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where do I sign?
Sure. Marilyn.
I agree that we need to have uniformity, and what becomes a problem is when some people try to go too strict or not strict enough, and then you lose the uniformity. And, it's livestock sighting, the mining, the wind towers, and other things, so that they get uniform throughout the state so that the ones that are going to be involved know what the rules and regulations are. Yes, I'd like to have more local control, but I also would like to have everybody know what they're doing when they start doing some rules and regulations, if they are enforceable and if they make sense instead of way off to one side or the other. That's why we have the uniformity, is because we've had some bad actors.
Supervisor Shapinsky.
Thank you, and Supervisor Langenhan, I thank you for your time and efforts putting this together. I agree completely. I support your efforts in terms of local control. I understand Marilyn's comments, and it's a balancing act between local control. Local control, if you mean it, means that there's going to be less uniformity. And I think that is an option that is worth considering and worth moving towards. So I fully support this.
Thank you. And those are the points that I just made are important because I addressed that in the second paragraph, which is where it basically notes that, hey, the universal framework that the state of Wisconsin has made for a lot of these issues, that sounds great on paper, but what we're actually seeing is this imbalance between, the authority at the local level to actually regulate something meaningfully and what the state of Wisconsin is essentially preempting in their authority. I'm trying to make this clear. I wanted to try and communicate this. So I'm thank you that you all are picking up on that. I appreciate that. So as far as where this would go after this, just to highlight a couple of things, I do want to take this to the executive committee for their review, because if I bring something to the county board, especially something like this, as I mentioned, I want to make this as vetted and as fit for prime time as possible. That's why I want to take it through 2 standing committees. So that's essentially what happened is the time frame going forward, and you would ultimately see this at the county board agenda later this month. So, Marilyn?
Yes, I'd like to see the local control, but I'd also like to see the legislature, when things change, that they update their concerns too. When you're supposed to meet every so often and you don't, and things change, the legislature also needs to update their standards like they're supposed to update. But I do agree that we need to have our local control as much as possible.
Sure. So, like I said, everybody's had a chance to review the letter today. I guess I would ask, with those amendments that I noted, of course, for a motion to refer this to executive committee for their review. Supervisor Ritter?
I'll make the motion to further it to executive.
Thank you. Second, Supervisor Shafinsky. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again, everyone. All right. Moving on to 7B, continued discussion regarding 2024 annual budget and policy recommendations from the committee. I'll just read these off here. 1, mandatory versus non-mandated programs. 2, use of fees and rates. And 3, understanding department's use of levy. I don't know who we're starting with, so.
I don't
Lori, I'm gonna
know
look
if
to you.
Supervisor Robinson or Administrator Leonard wanted to start with anything, or.
Well, thank you. We're looking to continue the discussion. I think that in your packet were some background information prepared by Parks and others, but we're again seeking input from the committees as to what services should we provide and what level of services should those be at, and what sort of fees or revenue sources should we be looking at to fund those programs. And I think you've got some information worthy of discussion in your packet, and I think we look for any input and contributions in developing the 2024 budget.
The only thing I'll add is I think largely the information that was alluded to by HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson that's in your packet that was prepared by Lori and her team and Jamie and hers, and then Dave is here as well, is in response to some of the quote-unquote homework asks that you had at your last meeting to kind of better understand fee philosophy, and Dave can talk through kind of the thought process used at solid waste. But I'm here largely to listen, and as Chair Robinson said, hopefully through this process we'll have some recommendations from this committee that would make their way to the full board for further instruction to county staff in building the budget.
And I'll just add, we did amend the packet and get them solid waste slides as well, and there are printouts that were handed to you at the beginning of this meeting as well with Dave's summary of the solid waste rates and fees. So. I don't know if you want us to take it department by department or how you want to start.
Why don't we start there if this is going to be, pretty freeform here? Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with CPZ, and then I guess Jamie and Dave, you can come up and explain some of the analysis that you all did for parks and solid waste as well. It's definitely, for CPZ, I'm going to steal. Yes. I'll speak louder. Okay. I'm going to steal Administrator Leonard's line about, we do everything A to Z in CPZ as well. We do addressing, and airport easements to zoning. So we did try and go through our programs again first and update some of the information as it relates to mandated versus non-mandated programs. I caught another error in our table even today as I was looking at that. When you look at the sanitary pouts ordinance, it should really probably be a yes, no in terms of mandated. We do have certain requirements as it relates to the maintenance program for our county from the state, and also holding tanks and smaller conventional systems, but we do have what's called expanded agent status for our mounds in the county. That's something we don't have to do, but it also is one of our biggest revenue generators and helps pay for the POUTS program. So if we wanted to return that, I think we'd want to reconsider before losing that revenue. We did also decide, based on the homework we were given, to first take a deeper dive into some of our regulatory programs. I think we've been asked by Administrator Leonard to explain a little bit more about what goes into those fees, and also by this committee previously when we discussed fees earlier this year. We were asked to explain a little bit more about our POUTS costs, our zoning costs, and our non-metallic programs in particular. So when you look at the slide about the 5-year average expense funding breakdown, the thing I want to emphasize here is this is the 5-year average expense and funding breakdown to deliver the entire program, not just permits. So in terms of what it takes to deliver a POUTS program or a zoning program, it's not just about permits. There's obviously complaints, variances, committee work, things like that that go into supporting these programs. But when we did look at our 5-year average, let me zoom out here. We looked at our 5-year average and we did update it using the new wages that were approved for 2023. And on average, we are using about 25% levy and 75% revenue to support our POUTS program, and we're at about 50-50 within our zoning program. Right now, our other assumptions with that are that we have 2.3 staff full-time supporting the zoning program and 3.3 staff full-time supporting the POUTS program. When we did this analysis, we also used average allocated cost and operational costs. So, for example, I probably don't use as much gas or use as many vehicles traveling throughout the county as our POUT staff or our zoning staff, but when we took our costs across the department, we divided by 30 to come to those assumptions. And then again, we updated this data using 2023 wages, benefits, fringe, all those things for the staff who support the program. Then we also did look at, to the questions related to fees, we did look at what does it actually take us to deliver an individual zoning permit. Historically, our fee philosophy has been identified through a number of factors. One is the guidance that we receive from ERC as it relates to what you all want us to try and recover based on the benefit to a landowner versus the benefit to the public. We also look at what other counties and nearby municipalities are charging. And again, the fees are set only tied to the aspects of a zoning permit issuance, not all aspects of a zoning program. So it's used to try and recover things related to issuing that permit, inspecting the permit, closing out the permit, things like that. So when we looked at that and updated it for the 2023 wages, on average, we are finding that our cost to deliver a zoning permit is $362, and we're recovering around $261 per permit. And right now, the other thing I want to add as it relates to this is level of customer service or expectation. Right now, what we do in terms of delivering permits is we definitely have staff on hand to guide customers through the permit process. Usually, a person can get a same-day appointment if they walk in. We certainly encourage setting up an appointment, but they can usually walk in, sit down, meet with a zoning staff member, and get started on their permit. We have up to 20 days to issue a zoning permit, but typically, I would say we're getting them out in 7 days or less is what we're doing right now. Then as it relates to POUTS, again, our historic fee philosophy has also been guidance from ERC in terms of what you want to see recovered based on benefit to the landowner and benefit to the public. We consider what other counties and nearby municipalities are charging. We do include the mandatory fees that we do have to pay to the state. So even if you wanted a permit to be completely free for POUTS, we still have a fee we have to pay for the state for every POUTS permit. And again, only tied to aspects of issuing the zoning permit, not other aspects of the POUTS program, such as complaints, violations, and the maintenance program. So here, based on our updated wages, we found that we are recovering, or it's costing us on average $638 per permit, and we are recovering on average $614 per permit. In terms of the level of expectation or the customer service the customer is getting, we have 30 days by law actually to turn these around. So that is but the same idea is usually that they can get somebody to sit down with when they call or come in for an appointment, and we can help guide them through the process. So non-metallic mining is slightly different in the sense that by statute we are supposed to try and recover as close as possible to the administration of the whole program in our fees. So when we did this analysis with our updated with our updated staff costs, we did recognize there is a significant gap that has developed. So we are going to bring forth a proposal to update our fees for 2024. We do have 127 operations in the county right now, and those fees are usually charged at the beginning of the calendar year. So this would go into effect in 2024. I don't think there's anything that could be changed before that. I'll let Shad to speak to that a little more. So,
yeah, as far as the non-metallic mining, it's an annual fee, so it's charged once. So to ensure that fees are evenly distributed, it would make sense to bring the change in the 2024 season versus going back to them asking essentially for more for the individuals who had paid.
and so again, with this, it's slightly different than zoning or POUTS in that we are trying to recover the cost of the whole program administration, not just the cost of a permit. And we do have mandatory fees that we have to give to the state as well. So we have 127 operations. Our average annual permit fee is about just under $1,000. And then we did start to look at our conservation programs, but we didn't, it's not very easy to divide these up and divide it by like what is grant versus revenue and levy, because the Land and Water Resource Management Plan, as Kirsty mentioned, is required by law, and everything that goes into that then is something that the county has committed to trying to deliver on, and we receive grant funding towards delivering all those programs. And so to say that how we divide it up or slice that pie in terms of what program gets what is not an easy thing to do an analysis on. What we can say at a whole level is we do have 8 full-time staff supporting our conservation programs, and on average, almost 5 of these are funded via grants and non-tax levy sources and fees. So I think that's a pretty good average considering what Kirsty and Matt explained in terms of the breadth of area and things we have to cover in this county as it relates to conservation. So, and again, our grant and our state grant funding that we get, most of it is tied to the implementation of that Land and Water Resource Management Plan. So it's kind of like when you agree to deliver these things in the plan, you also get that funding that comes along with it. So. And then Jamie, do you want to stop and do questions, Jake, or do you want to transfer to the next program?
I thought this might be more general discussion.
Okay.
So if the departments would want to go through, provide your information afterwards, the committee can start discussing. So yeah, Director Polly, if you'd want to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I did mine in a little bit different format. We put together an analysis, my staff and I, that we've been working on actually for, I don't know, a year and a half by direction of Administrator Leonard, trying to look at our department as a whole, how we could reduce our levy support either by generating more revenue or reducing some expenditures, doing some investment into our facilities that might bring in more revenue and different ideas. So Rick has heard this twice already today, so if you have any questions, you can ask Mr. Seifelt. I'm not going to go through the entire program that I put together into your packet today, just because it is a lot of background information. So I will talk about our goals, how we get to our fees and how we look at our fees, and then some of the actionable items that we have as a plan in here. So the goal of this, as I mentioned, is to reduce dependency on tax levy dollars for operations and capital projects, and increasing efficiencies with the department. So in here we put a lot of information, not a lot, but some, and then there's some links in here too that I encourage you to go to that have to do with statistics of parks and recreation and the benefits of them to your community, to your quality of life, to economic development, to health and social well-being, to a number of items, because on the list that you see of mandated versus non-mandated services, Parks and Recreation and Forestry is a non-mandated department for the most part. There are things that we do that are governed by state law, state statute, and county ordinances, but they're not necessarily mandated. So, for instance, our whole forestry division. Forestry is our #1 generating activity that we do within our department. Forest management is a good sustainable practice. There is a forest managed law that we enter all of our county forests into, and we follow those statutes. So we follow the statutes. However, the county can choose not to manage your forests. Now, I can go into all of the reasons why that's not a good idea, but that is something that you could choose to not do. So I think the area that we need to look at as far as our department is that we may not be mandated, but we are, everything that we provide, and I can say everything has a benefit to the community in some way, shape, or form, whether it is just quality of life and drawing people to this community to live and to work, to giving them a place where they can socialize, be active, be outside, enjoying nature, but also an economic development piece. Our county, our city, the Conventions and Visitors Bureau, the Chamber have all really been working for the last couple of years on this idea of outdoor recreation being a very important asset that our county and our region has. And we are a part of that. It's not just Rib Mountain State Park. It is all of our county parks that we have that go along with it, from 9 Mile to Big Old Plain, to what we manage with the Mountain Bay State Trail. We are a part of that economic driver to get tourism here, to attract talent, to attract businesses, and we play a part in that. So it is a benefit of what we provide, although it is not mandated. So in here, we also have some background of our department. One thing I wanted to point out is just looking at our budgets. Our budgets have gone up in the last 15 years. However, our levy dependency has stayed pretty consistent. It has gone up, but we also, and I put an asterisk here in 2017, that's when our sports complex got added to, we've had a number of things added to our plate, facilities and tasks, but that one particularly is supposed to be an enterprise fund. However, in the documentation that I have found from when it was developed and open, and it went to our park commission, I believe last year or the year before when we were doing budget, is the direction of that is to be a minimum of 70% cost recovery. So a true enterprise fund would be 100% cost recovery. The county chose to open this facility, have it be an enterprise fund with a 70% cost recovery. I think last year we were at 74 or 76% cost recovery, and our goal is to make it 100%. But that did add some amount to our tax levy in 2017 and on. So that is part of that increase. So looking at fees, one things we do to look at fees, and our fee structure is in your packet, along with all the rest of the county fees, is we look at these fees every single year. Our park commission sees these fees every single year, and they have the ability to change or make us look into other ways of doing our fees when we discuss those. We take them to late fall, usually before the budget is approved, and we work those in. Usually we raise our fees by the cost of living. So we have done a 3% increase to our shelter rentals for the last 4 years. We've also looked at our usage fees. The last time they have been raised them a little bit. We try to be very cognizant of the number of things we're charging for, that the consumer is paying for, keeping them at a reasonable rate. We do look at our area counties and other people offering the same services that we do and try to stay competitive so that we keep drawing people to our services and not forcing them to go elsewhere. But there is probably more that we could do. Some of our fees have just been set that way, and we've kept them that way for many years. Our new fees, we always look at those versus what the cost of the service is. So trying to that return on investment and that cost recovery for that service. We have not done that with every single fee that we have, and that's part of our plan, which I'll get to in a second, is to see how much cost recovery we are getting for each of those services. This is just a graph we put in here to show you our top 4 revenue generating activities within the department. Timber sales is by far the biggest, and that is one that fluctuates from year to year because our timber sale contracts are 3-year contracts. So our loggers can choose to cut all the contracts in 1 year and we get all that revenue, and then the next year we may have less because of the fact that they have 3 years to cut those sales. So we have a kind of a sliding revenue scale with that, but we budget an even flow number when we do our budget versus trying to budget what we think that's going to come in. So we do get excess revenue from that quite often because we budget, this year was $305,000. Last year we brought in almost $550,000, so we had an excess revenue portion there, where in all of these years we've brought in more than what we budgeted. We have had year, I believe it was 2016, I have to go back. Tom, our county forest administrator, has every single year back to 2002, I think it is, to show you where our numbers have been. And there's been 2 years where we've been lower than what we've budgeted, but the rest have been around or above. I put in some information about current operations. What I wanted to point out with my department as well is that we are a county department. We have contracted with the city for over 50 years officially, 100 years as a joint director. We have the county or the city budget is within our county budget, and that city budget is considered 100% revenue to the county. So any expenditures we have to the city are paid back by the city to your county budget. So we have essentially, I think we had a 63, it's on one of these pages, a 63% cost recovery last year, and that is in part because over half our budget is the city budget. That is revenue to the city. Now, we are on the city tax levy for that budget, so we are levy supported for the city, but when it comes to the county budget and what you're budgeting for, our city is 100% cost recovery. And then you can see we have designated staff budgeted to city and county, and that is within those budgets. This is just one page I wanted to point out. It's just that information that I mentioned about coming from the National Parks and Recreation Association that has a lot of research on the benefits of parks and recreation, the different areas that we do contribute to. And so if you have this electronically and click on those numbers, it'll take you right to that research. This is a great resource. They keep it up to date. They do a lot of it. We rely on them quite often. And we're working on trying to get those numbers and making them local as well. So I talked about our fees a little bit. I'm going to go down to the last part of this, which is our actionable steps of what we're looking for to come out of here. So as we look at our fees and making ourselves less revenue or less levy dependent, we are working on a number of things. We broke them down into direct, moderately involved, and complex tasks. The direct tasks are tasks that our staff can do now that we've already been working on, actually. We just have to work on it a little bit more. We have to finish. They're more short term. One is we're developing a sponsorship guide. Last year, our county board and our city council adopted our sponsorship and naming rights policy. We're working on that to increase our revenue. Right now, we've only used it for special events or for the sports complex, but I think there's some opportunity there to get some more funding through our local partners. We conduct public outreach every 5 years when we update our outdoor recreation plan. I think we need to do this a little bit more often to stay in touch with what our community needs and adjust our programs and our fees and stuff accordingly. So we will do some more public outreach. And then we had used in the past, or had started using, the priority-based budgeting. I think that's where we look at that program list that you have that's mandated versus non-mandated, and we really look at that more closely. One thing that came out of the Park Commission meeting this afternoon is they would like us to add a column to that page that talks about those services and how much of the levy those services are on. So much of those services may be 100% cost recovery. That may make a difference when you're making a decision of whether you look at this service versus this service. Like mowing is not 100% cost recovery. That's probably totally levy, but do you want to get rid of it? And then what was the impact of that? So I'll work on getting that column onto that sheet. And then definitely continue our interdepartmental partnerships. We have the city. We've talked with other communities as far as partnering. We work very closely with Highway in the last 2 years. The Sheriff's Department, our recreation deputies have been an amazing partnership there. City Public Works, City Engineering. So we'll continue to do that to make ourselves more efficient. Then in our moderately involved task, this is going to take a little bit longer, but it's getting to the actual actions, is This is where I talked about our fee analysis. We do need to take extra time to look at the fees and really look at our services and figure out the full cost of what the services are and whether our fees are matching that. And then that will come back to the Park Commission for some policy discussion on which programs and which services should be 100% cost recovery versus which ones match the market and so on. So we'll be diving into that. We do that to a portion, like I said, every year, but we need to do it a little bit more. Reviewing our programs and looking at our successful programs and minimizing those that are not successful. This has to do a lot with recreation programs, but also looking at some of the things that we maybe don't need to do. We could contract out for, or we could look for another entity that does it. Or some of our really successful programs, maybe we need to invest in those a little bit more to make them even more successful. So that's an ongoing task, but we will continue that. And then the third part of this, which we've started to already with the West Side Master Plan, is identifying the underutilized spaces and buildings that could hold stronger profit opportunities and return on investments with proper investment and renovation. So I've been emailing Chris back and forth about Eastgate Hall. It was something that was identified in the West Side Master Plan. It's our largest rental facility. It is used for weddings, large events. It does have some needs for updates and maintenance and some failing areas of it that we need to address. But in addition to that, what is it that we could do at a cost-effective manner to make that building more attractive, to attract more uses of it, to generate more revenue, maybe charge a higher fee. So we have a couple of things like that we could do. So the last one is the complex tasks that go long-term, but it's really where we start doing the work, utilizing what the public outreach items have said, putting that to practice, changing some of the way we do our day-to-day tasks, programs we offer, implementing improvements. So that's going to be, turning in the CIP is one thing, getting those items approved and actually making the changes, and then looking at those fees and getting those facilities marketed would be the next step in there. One thing else also is to sit down with county administration and finance and to talk about our enterprise funds, look at our 3 enterprise accounts that we currently have, evaluate whether they are really should be enterprise accounts or not. What other opportunities might we have for enterprise accounts that we aren't currently utilizing that are in our operating budget. I think that needs to be talked about a little bit further, as well as looking at our potential revenues and excess revenues that we bring in. Is there a potential to put those into a capital improvement fund for our department, such as those timber revenues? Could they be put into a designated fund to help offset those years where we don't bring in enough revenue, but then also to build that project or that fund up to do capital projects, so we don't have to come to the county board and ask for more money for those, and to be more sustainable. And then we are working on with the implementation of Workday. We will work with CCIT to figure out if we want to keep doing the task tracking and job costing. We're doing it we did it quite a bit with our old system, Workday. We've made it work for now, but what do we really need to track? What is the desire of the city and the county to know what tasks we do, how much we spend doing this activity versus that? We do need to track our work for the city because we do bill them for that, but to what detail, we're going to work through all of that. And then our carbon credits program is something that our county forest administrator has looked into quite a bit. It's still an evolving program with a lot of questions versus how it works versus the county forest law. So we are still pursuing this. This could potentially be a large revenue source, similar to the gas fees that we're getting out at solid waste. But this has a little bit more moving pieces to it. There's a long-term commitment, so we'll be looking at that further. And the last page on here isn't anything that you or I can do anything about, but we wanted to throw this in there because there is discussions at the state level as it pertains to funding parks, open space, and natural resources, specifically with our state parks, and the need there and how much they've been cut, and the deferred maintenance costs that the state is facing. Also, Milwaukee County Parks is in a bit of a struggle and looking at other ways. There are things that our legislators at the state level could do to help with funding of our parks and open spaces, so it doesn't all come from user fees or tax levy. The state of Minnesota in 2010 issued a referendum for a small tax to be put forward that strictly goes to parks, open space, conservation, and culture, or the arts. And it was successfully passed. I think it was like 78% or something passed. I lived there, but I don't remember what this percentage was. But it has gone to significantly help fund trail development, parks, state parks, county parks can be used for local things as well as the state things. The state can also look at collective districts, such as park districts like Illinois has. Our area could benefit from that based on our little section of central Wisconsin and what our current relationship already is with the city and conversations we've had. But a lot of these things are what the legislature right now is talking about doing and looking at to help out Milwaukee County. I think the reason why I'm putting this in there is because the state is bigger than Milwaukee County, and there are things that could be changed for Milwaukee County that could also benefit us up here, and so we just need to have our finger on the pulse of what the legislator is looking at and making sure that we're not left out as central Wisconsin because we're not the big populated areas like Milwaukee or Dane County. So these are just options we need to keep an eye on. So that is my area.
All right, thank you. Like I said, we'll have general discussion after this. We'll have staff available for questions. Mr. Dave.
Anything, Rick?
Oh, well, a few. That motion is a lot longer at times.
Yeah, I'll be brief and I'll be honest. I threw a couple of bullet points together and then I saw Jamie and Lori's presentation. So I said I got to go back and change it a little bit. I got to add some more. They were just too good. So. So solid waste, get to talk about some.
She had a year and a half.
She had a year and a half. I had a couple days. But so no, this is a fun topic. I think the last slide is probably the most exciting. But just to be brief, solid waste department is not mandated, but since 1979, the county acquired land out in Ringgold. We set up a landfill, and we've been in the business ever since. We do have many local ordinances, however, that require trash collection. You can't just pile it up just outside your house. So it is a requirement on that level. And the alternative is just having garbage go wherever. So we wanted a spot for it to go. The rates are set by the Solid Waste Management Board, and we go through these every year, and we charge a tipping fee per ton. So for every ton of garbage that goes in the ground, there is a fee that's associated with it. We're essentially building capacity and then selling the airspace within that capacity. And we see ourselves, if you ask any of our staff, our mission is to protect human health and the environment. We see ourselves just as important as the county highway plowing roads. We're here to provide a service for the community. So we do not rely on tax dollars. However, a lot of revenue actually comes from the taxpayers indirectly. So if you think of it this way, if you're a resident, you own a home, you're paying the township or village or municipality that you're in, you're paying a fee for those collection services. The hauler then charges a fee to come out and collect the waste from the curbside. And then we charge a fee to those haulers a lot of times. So while it might not be a direct taxpayer payment, indirectly through the various channels, we end up getting paid by them. Residents pay the town for trash, the town pays the hauler pays the landfill. Now we also contract directly with municipalities. We also contract directly with many local businesses. If you think of the Apogee Line Tech Group, some of the local paper mills, Wausau Window and Wall, Colby and Colby. We also have contracts set up with those large manufacturers because when it gets down to it, this is like a business. There's constant competition with the private sector. Our incentive is always to help the community. The private sector incentive might just be to make more money. So our huge goal is always to help the local municipalities keep costs low for them so they don't have to put those costs back onto their residents. Also, an important part is to ensure that there isn't a monopoly. So when I talk about a monopoly, we wouldn't want, let's say, a private sector, GFL or Waste Management to come in and own the landfill and then also own all the hauling contracts in the area, because then they can essentially charge whatever they want. So that's where it becomes very challenging, and where we see about 50% of the municipal solid waste landfills in the state of Wisconsin are actually publicly owned. It's sort of that check on the private sector to ensure rate stabilization. So everything we do is paid for through our tipping fees. Any profit we might see is going to support value programs that our Solid Waste Management Board has set in place. And then any additional is rolled into any sort of construction fund that we might need for future expansions. And you can sort of see that breakdown. You'll see a very large percentage, and I know that pie chart was on the last page, but a very large percentage is actually going to the state. So for every ton of garbage that goes into the landfill, $13 goes to the state of Wisconsin. This is much different than some of the other competing states. We actually have waste management that will drive by our site sometimes and take garbage all the way up to the UP because they only have to pay, I believe it's $2 per ton rather than $13 per ton. So that's how some of that competition works as well. So these programs, I'm talking household hazardous waste, sharps collection, medication drop box, all these things that really support the community for making us the healthiest, safest, and most prosperous. So yes, while we have control over the rate, and we do change it, normally based on CPI increases, if we go lower, we may lose the funding to actually do the programs. If we go higher, we may actually lose that incoming tonnage. Express Disposal was bringing about 30,000 to 40,000 tons our way, and then they were bought out by GFL. When GFL bought them out, they went to the west, a 7-mile landfill in Eau Claire. So we lost about 30,000 tons that year. And that's how quickly things can change. So the last slide. This is the fun one. Future opportunities to support the general fund. Now, Administrator Leonard and I have been talking about this for quite some time. It's no surprise. I think it was brought up at the last meeting. What opportunities are out there? What's available? The most exciting one is the Renewable Natural Gas Project, which everybody's aware of. I think it was very early January. County Board voted to secure our gas rights back. Administrator Leonard and I have done that. We've secured our gas rights, and we've entered into a gas purchase agreement where we're actually getting a royalty off the sale and collection and sale of the landfill gas. Now, while that hasn't started yet, we are receiving a small percentage at this time. And we're starting to evaluate ways where we might be able to share that. Of course, solid waste is going to incur some cost because we do want to try to get as much gas out of there as possible. So quality and quantity are both very important. But that's the most likely area where we might be able to support the general fund. Please be mindful that we have significant capital expenses and everything is fuel driven. So when we do a closure, we do an expansion, we might plan for something, but then if the fuel prices are really high that year, when we're trucking in clay, when we're bringing in plastic to lay down, everything, all the earthwork, that's all being done by heavy equipment. Another future consideration, of course, is PFAS, and we really don't know what that looks like, but we need to start thinking about it. It's been on our radar for sure. And if we were to look into our operational budget and see where we can possibly share from that, there's 3 high areas, and the one, I would say leachate disposal is probably the one area where we might be able to make change. The other 2, yes, there's small opportunity there, but the leachate disposal right now for our site is actually going out of county. So if we were to able to find a way to treat leachate either on site or within Marathon County, we could see significant savings there that we might be able to pass off to the general fund. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I just ask the committee and members of staff to jump in with thoughts, but this is really just to pick off where we left off last month, talking about level of service in the the fees that we charge. I'll be honest, I was very surprised that I think I saw the number of 61% that were getting recovery for parks operations. I did not realize it was that high.
That includes all the city.
Yep. So, thoughts, discussion?
I do think that we need to be careful about fee recovery. Let's not lose sight of the fact that fees are just a more targeted tax. I mean, it's not, nothing more or less than that. And our citizens, we are here. They instituted county government to provide things that they cannot do for themselves. So we do have some obligation to provide some level of services, whether they're mandated by state law or not. The political realities are that we have things that we do need to do. And spreading that out over the taxpayer base overall is not a bad thing. Doing some recovery of targeted fees can make some sense, but let's not always turn to, well, A, how much can we raise fees? And number two, how much can we raise taxes? And number three, can we come up and find new taxes to impose? I think from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of the people that sent me here, they would tell you, no. Their answer is no, we don't want to see any tax increases, or we want to see as little as possible. So, we need to step back and look at that and make hard choices sometimes. So.
I guess my comment would be to Supervisor Ritter's point from the prior month was that if you do decide to rely more on if you decide to rely more on fees, then you get into this situation where if you increase the fees, you're going to have less, interest in using those facilities. I was talking with the director in regards to the ice operations at our facilities because I was looking at a couple of things across the departments the last month or so for items that were just of interest that I wanted to learn more about to see if there were opportunities there. And one note, I believe in the email, the director noted that was, if you're looking at those fees and you look at the community groups that use them, one of the things that we look at is that comparable facilities that are out there and what they charge. So if we're, exorbitantly high, well, then they're probably not going to be interested in using it, which I think that, and I think Supervisor Robinson might have left us here, but really one of the discussions that we do have to have is that would the county be interested in offering those things, which is one of the reasons why I asked about the user groups that were in those areas that use those facilities, because they would be concerned if the county stopped providing them, which to the point that was just made, you look at the political side of things, is that what are the residents actually asking for? So the other thing I wanted to note, just how you start to, and I know the administrator probably agree with me, if you start to look at some of this stuff, it can start to unravel. The land information officer position, I was talking with Lori about this past month. That's not a required position in the county, but if you actually go and read, I think it's 59.72 of the statutes, there's a list of duties that counties have to do. And the land information officer is one of the ways that you can choose to provide those mandates, essentially. And those, I think that also is related to the fees.
Yeah, you have to have a land information officer to retain fees, so.
And it also turns out that title, so.
Use the retain fees, I should.
Yeah, which, like I said, I had a very good conversation with the director where I said, well, who's the person that's responsible for this? Because I don't know who our land information officer is. Do they have an office at CPZ? And the director pointed out that a current employee, that's part of their responsibilities, to which I said, well, yeah, we could get rid of the land information officer position, but those functions aren't going to go away. So all you're doing is taking away a title from that individual. So At least in my opinion.
Yes,
but,
yes, it's a very small, that is only part of their position.
So it looks like, have you averaged out, I guess I would ask this to CPZ director, or the Conservation Planning and Zoning Director, have you looked at, similar to what Parks has done, and averaged them out, all the areas that all the areas that the department charges fees for, have you averaged them out and looked at what the cost recovery is as a whole for everything?
Not on individual programs, not on everyone. We started with our regulatory programs, but what we were trying to explain is it's not as easy to do this with conservation. There's obviously some fee recovery in some of the conservation services we provide, but it's really the grant money we get related to that is so tied to the Land and Water Resource Management Plan that it's not. There's not really a strict formula in saying that animal waste is recovering this much in fees versus grants. Like, it just doesn't work the same way.
And the follow-up to that for that point is, have we ever explored, and this is kind of an uncomfortable topic, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, have we ever explored what a lower level of service would look like for the zoning process?
I believe, and this would go to some people who've been here longer, but yes, I believe that you had an in-depth discussion at the ERC maybe 5 years back or so in terms of the type of level of service you wanted to provide as it related to zoning. And we can definitely bring that back before you again. But at the time, I think it was decided that it was sort of I'm going to say above average level of service is what the committee had given the direction in terms of expectations of what a customer should get for what they're paying for. There were different levels that were presented, and that was the one that was agreed upon was slightly above average. So it wasn't like the highest level, like you're not going to get a permit the same day. We have 20 days to issue a permit. In general, we take about 7. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
okay.
I think also when you start thinking about zoning level of service, though, since permit issuance is not the only service we provide to our county zone towns, in terms of complaints and tracking complaints. Yeah. So.
I look at it more like, if somebody wants to call CPZ and ask for a zoning application, I would trust that there is staff available, such as our zoning administrator, that can walk them through that process, or another staff member on hand. I would like to know historically how we arrived at that level. Not saying that I want to reduce it either. I would just like to know how we got there for zoning to see if we can look at that through other areas. I don't know if that makes sense. Because if it's not fees and other revenue, then you have to look at level of service, which, trying to think what else I was going to say. Did anybody else have any other thoughts? I feel like I'm the only one talking today. Not against everybody
Chair?
else. It's been a long meeting. Yes, Supervisor
Yes, I think you bring up a very good point, and yes, it is uncomfortable, but I think that's one worth revisiting, and it's a point revisiting in many areas, but in this particular context, let's take a look at what is the cost of providing an above average level of service? What is the cost savings or differential if we go from 7 days to 10 to 14 or whatever that might be? That type of data then gives us the ability to make an informed decision. If you look from 5 years ago to today, costs have been impacted. Is it still worth making the same trade-off? We don't know. So I think it would be worth knowing.
As my other point I was going to make, and maybe the administrator would have some information as well, because again, it's one of those things I'll admit I complained about last month. I will admit it. I complained last month about the process that this is. The process for this is it's been rolled out for the standing committees. Administrator Leonard, do you know by chance what this standing committees, the programming, what its reliance on the levy is? as a percentage of the total levy for the county itself?
So the place to look in that would be the charts that we laid out in the budget kickoff meeting, and we did have the 5-year where you can see the overall budget expenses and revenues with the tax levy percentages, those additional columns on the right. So that is at a high level for each department. But if you're trying to look at individual programs, as Lori alluded to, sometimes that's a bit more challenging, because the way in which the county budgets, and you all had the pleasure of being sent the 600, and I believe it's 17 pages, 617-page document that breaks out the line items that we have within individual county department budgets. We don't have program, for lack of a better term, program-based budgeting. As Lori said, we have an administration budget, and she had to rly upon a number of assumptions to essentially allocate out what I'll call overhead, because of the way that counties budget across the state of Wisconsin. It just makes that a bit cumbersome. And I don't want to say inaccurate, but I would say it's imprecise. You're relying upon analytical assumptions to allocate out things like Lori's time, like building maintenance, and reliance upon, as Lori said, vehicle expenses, or something as mundane as paper, right? Not every program uses the same amount of paper. I was in the Corporation Counsel's office, and I was in charge of child protection case prosecution. That uses a lot more paper than, or postage, I should say, than other programs, because you had to mail a lot of stuff, certified mail. So you have to rely upon assumptions to do that from a program standpoint. The one thing I can, I don't know if you'll take this as a positive sign, or perhaps ask a question, why wasn't this done 15 years ago? And it's a fair question. But to your specific question about, and I think it's Supervisor Sherfinsky's points about, what are our targets for service level, and how can we be more informed about those targets for each program that we're working on? That is going to be one of the first tasks I have for the data officer position, and that position was posted last Friday. So that's an active recruitment. Again, it's an idea of, for each of our programs and services that we offering a couple of key performance indicators. So one of those, in my mind, right now, is how much of something did we do? So for example, permits. Maybe how much of a particular program we offer is permit-based. It's a number. But then the second part is, how well did we do it? To Supervisor Sherfinsky's point, maybe we're issuing the average permit in 7 days, but we can have a discussion about, is that enough? Is that how well, timeliness as a measure of how well, is that the target we want, 7 days? Or perhaps is 10 days, 15 days, 20 days appropriate in light of the trade-offs? Similarly, along those same lines about how well did we do something, it might be a quality measure. How many, did we have any mistakes with respect to our permit reviews? And then the last part is kind of the thing that I know the county board and this committee spend a lot of time around, which is comments that all the presenters made today is anyone better off? It's that last measure, what is the impact? Because if it's a non-mandated program, you want to know that. And we need to have an indicator, a key performance indicator for that area as well. So that's something, to your point, Chair Langenhahn, that information is coming. My sense is that historically, this committee and the county board as a whole, as do many other counties in the state of Wisconsin that my colleagues work in, it's largely been anecdotal. If there's a complaint about something, plowing snow or cutting grass are two that get complaints very frequently. You need to plow more frequently, or you need to cut the grass more frequently. That's how you are informed, is through constituent complaints. And I recognize that that's not the most helpful, but that has been the way, again, this is my sense, that those service level decisions have been driven. My hope is, And my expectation is that with the data officer position over time, we'll develop a dashboard that you can see real time what our performance is. And those things are going to change. If we have staffing turnover, you can see that perhaps our zoning timeline is going to change. Something that used to take, if we had several very skilled zoning staff, knowledgeable zoning staff, maybe we were going through permits every 7 days. But if we have significant turnover, as we had historically over the last couple of years, maybe that timeline increases and we can provide you that explanation. And then you as the policymakers can help us determine whether or not we bring additional resources to bear on that to address those service level issues.
I want to make this point. My iPad's about to go dead here, but Park Rec and Forestry, if I'm reading this right, levy as percentage of total department, Park Rec and Forestry is at 31%. And Conservation Planning and Zoning, I think I read, was 33. Wow.
If I can make a comment on that, I think you'll hear, I hope you hear this from a lot of department heads. One of my, things I beating the drum of, look for every additional outside revenue source that exists. To Supervisor Shafinsky's point, that doesn't always mean fees, but grants, state money that's available, federal money that's available, because what that does, those monies are already being collected, and if we can leverage those, sponsorships is another one those are ways that we can drive down that levy reliance. Again, we only try to do that in programs that, we're not trying to grow just for the sake of growth. It's growing in areas where we need to.
But like you look at like the sheriff, they're at 91, right? So like, have they been exploring discussions about what they can do to lower that, or?
Absolutely. And I would just say that we have a lot of departments that deliver different services. And solid waste is zero levy once the landfill was put in place.
Dave's doing a great job.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that general fund contribution. But the sheriff's department is different. That is when you look at how local law enforcement has been set out and set up within the statutes, that is a levy-funded activity. Running a jail is, if there were a business decision to do that, you would choose something else.
No, I meant that comment more like I didn't know, based on that service that the county has provided, I didn't know how they could be flexible at 91%. That's what I meant.
Well, it's a fair amount of it is grants. I'll give you two examples. Grants, they do seek out grant funding. And secondly, we've just expanded our contract with the town, currently the town of Rib Mountain. They desired like you're having a conversation about a higher level of service. The sheriff's office is required to provide sheriff services within towns. Towns are not mandated to have law enforcement, whereas certain size villages and cities are. However, the town of Rib Mountain wanted that higher level of service, so they contracted with the sheriff's office for a specific deputy or deputies to be assigned to that area. So that's an incoming revenue driving down your tax levy reliance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Marilyn.
I think you have to look at the level of service. When somebody calls your office and they need a permit, they want that service as soon as possible. Now, if it concerns with the parks, that's not as critical because they don't need that permit in order to get something done. And I think you need to look at the level of service. When someone calls, I need this permit to be able to do this, this, and this, there's a different level that you need to go to. Now, with the parks, they don't have where somebody says, I need this permit in order to do this, this, and this. So there's different levels of what each department has to do. And to think whether it is on the levy or if it's something that's, that you have to do. If it was saying one time, we do this because some people thought it was important that you do something. It's not a mandate, but it's what the people wanted. So you have to look, why is something a mandate and something not? in the level of service that the people expect to have for Marathon County.
I mean, I guess I would disagree with that. I would agree with part of that, and I would disagree with part of that. I would agree in that, like we were talking about earlier, where you have to look at what the public is asking the county to do. I would disagree with the idea that if somebody calls and says that they want to have a spot at a campground, they need to have that permit before they have a spot at the campground.
Right. So there's different levels. Yes, for some permits like that, yes, they would need to be able to get service to know that they could be able to have that camping spot. So you need to look at what the question is and what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm. We've been here for 2.5 hours,
Yes.
but I wanted to make one other inquiry. And by the way, this is something I wanted to provide direction for Supervisor Robinson. This is a policy board. We shouldn't have to get into the micromanagement of these things. But have the departments, and they probably have already, but I'd like that information, the reliance of digitizing, like online applications for permits, things like that. Has the county done a comprehensive look into what that would look like for CPZ or the Parks Department? I'm curious because Lance is just talking about paper, so.
Right.
Yeah, we've made that has been a real focus. I think starting with, you want to talk through your website and how you've changed what used to be people lining up to sign up for campgrounds and how they do it now?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, we implemented a new recreation software called Civic Rec, which basically put, our old software really just did some programming online. It didn't do the camping permits online, anything like that. Now we are about 75% online. There is a couple of things with some bigger special events and those things that people still have to come into the office for, or at least call us over the phone. But all camping reservations, all recreation programs, all facility rentals, even ice time, all of that is now done online. We actually, too, just went completely digital with our recreation brochure. So this is the first year we don't have printed copies of our summer brochure. We've actually only had 2 people call and ask for a printed copy, and so we printed one off for them. But that was, we did it through the buyer's guide, but it was still a cost to the buyer's guide and a cost to us for doing that, so that saved money. But we're doing a lot more digital in that respect, too, and we're hoping with the new website we can do even more as we get that all aligned.
So it sounds like that's already a priority of the county.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, with our new website, that is a huge focus. My mantra to department heads is, I want our website to be more Amazon and less Britannica. Like if you needed to write a book report about Marathon County, we had a website that would help you. But our old website, to Jamie's point, if you wanted to electronically reserve a campsite, no, it didn't. We didn't have a lot of that available. So we really are focusing on what is user experience. How can we get a system that I think long-term is actually going to be more cost-effective for us because we're not having to maintain staff that maintain a website. We're going to have that. We're going to contract for a lot of that service and have, the back end be provided to us. But that is a challenge for all department heads, is to really look at who are we serving, how can we better serve them, and HR Finance is having those discussions just with some stuff as mundane as what are hours of operations? Because, we're open in a lot of places from 8 to 4:30, but when do people work? The majority of people work 8 to 4:30. So how can we evolve like the rest of the economy to better align with the needs of the public? And that's been a focus long before I was the administrator, but it's certainly been a focus of department heads recently.
Marilyn.
And I think if the online things is terrific because people can do that and you don't, and not during the office hours. And even with the conservation zoning and planning, the more reports that people can do online at their convenience and fill out is great. It's less of your time mailing out things to them. So if they can do it online, whatever departments can do online, I think they should do possible for forums and permits and everything possible.
If I could add one thing in that document I have, one of the things we are pointing out too is trying to do more electronic pay stations, because right now we still do pay tubes with envelopes, and we have somebody going and checking those every day, so there's a lot of staff time in that. If we can figure out how to do electronic pay stations for like boat launch passes, campground permits, even right now we use QR codes like at 9 Mile where someone can scan the QR code and buy their bike pass right on their phone, and then we'll send them out the physical pass. So we're looking at a lot of that. One of the challenges we found with electronic pay stations is either power, to get power there, or internet. In some cases, they need internet connections for the Wi-Fi to hook up. But we're doing some more research that is part of that plan. So,
as the last thing I'll have for discussion today, to go back to the zoning piece with the level of service, the other thing I would add is that, you know, as far as towns adopting county zoning, which has been an ask or a goal of ours historically, I want to highlight to this committee, depending on what we can offer to those towns, if that does go lower, this is what I think would happen. The town would ultimately drop out of county zoning, and they would have to go get their own town zoning if they want to administer their own zoning code, and they aren't going to avoid that they're not going to avoid that cost in their taxpayers anyway, you know? Because then instead of having a couple towns under county zoning, you're going to have a bunch of different zoning administrators across all the towns.
Yeah, I think I would just add, like, we talk about, you know, the level of service. It's not just about delivering a permit, whether it's 7 days or 20 days. There's certain things we're delivering to the county's own towns that I think you have to be considered with that level of service. And then also our requirement to shoreline zoning for the entire county is also a factor.
Is there a discussion to be had about prioritization? Like, I know we talk about priority-based budgeting. Maybe we're not even at that point to have those discussions yet, but I don't know if the administrator has any info to provide there.
Prioritization in what regard?
As far as like the programs that each of our departments offer. Like, for example, if you're going to talk about the level of service that you provide for zoning, which, you know, I would make the argument that while it's not a mandated program, there are elements there that would say that the public definitely wants it. But if you look at something that's required, you see what I'm saying? Like, you divert more resources to what needs to be a priority versus what's not mandated.
Yeah, I think that that is being done at the various committees. They're having discussions about the things that, to your point, are priorities, but the definition of priority can shift. It can be a mandate in some situations, whereas I had one conversation with a standing committee chairperson where their discussion is that they're going to start with those programs that are most reliant upon tax levy, where you might have a program in your respect that maybe it's largely reimbursed through state or federal grants or revenues, but nevertheless, it's the thing that the department is known for and that people most look to for service. That might rise to the top of being a priority for discussion, not because it's a large tax levy, impact. So I would say the priority discussions, or I should say discussions, are being prioritized at the various committees, but not all in the same way.
So let me throw this out there, and this is going to be a really uncomfortable question to ask our administrator. But if we're at, you know, 61%, I think, was the number that I know the director mentioned that was what the city baked into that number. But we had between, I think it was 50% for the zoning fee, and then what was the other one that was at 75%? There was another one.
Outs is at 75% revenue, 25% levy.
So this department has a history of, I would say, reviewing the reliance on the levy already because they're looking for other funding sources that are out there through grants and fees. In your opinion, Mr. Administrator, and like I said, this is an uncomfortable question, so you might have to play politician for a minute. Those other departments, have they been doing that with the same rigor that our departments have been?
That's a tough question. I think you have I won't play politician, but I think you have an added benefit of, Jamie alluded to the Parks Commission and that they look at those fees on an annual basis. Similarly with the Solid Waste Management Board, they have a separate standalone body that is reviewing those things. It's not making its way to the county board necessarily, which I think is an opportunity for us. Other departments, the short answer is no, they haven't reviewed their fees as frequently. I'll give you an example of the medical examiner's office. I've used that in a number of committees. It was envisioned for us to do that, but we didn't have the back-end processes in place for that to happen. I think through the budget, we will get there, but the short answer, no, there are fees that haven't been reviewed for a number of years.
So beyond fees, though, because like I said, I think that what these departments have historically been doing, at least what the Director Miskimins has been reporting, like we looked at a lot of support from grant funding for a lot of our positions, right? So like it's beyond fees; it's also the grants that are out there too.
I would say, on balance across all of our departments, yes, there is a realization, excuse me, to look at those outside funding sources for things that we are already engaged in the business of doing. We had a conversation about nurse-family partnership with the health department, looking for a model change to a program that the county board has endorsed for multiple decades. So staff are engaged in trying to find the least, I will say, the most cost-effective way to deliver a program or service. That's a staff job. So if you're not going to change fees, we're going to look, to your point, for grants to decrease the cost of delivering that service. We're also going to look at, is there a way that we could outsource a program like Jamie referenced? Just because the county board says we want to deliver a program or service does not mean that we put out a job posting and hire people to do it. We contract for a great many of things. We've had very interesting and spirited conversations about jail meals. Of all things, sexy as jail meals. Whether or not we cook them ourselves or we pay someone else to cook them and deliver them, that's a how question. We might ask you to pay for a kitchen to help us cook if we're going to go there. But staff are doing that. I am challenging staff to do that. I have been challenging staff to do that as part of their job, and I think they've been doing a good job. The fee part is, I think, the opportunity for a increased knowledge base, not only on the part of staff, but also on the part of the county board. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I guess my point is that, to some points that are already raised by this group, if we feel uncomfortable raising the fees, because if we're at 50-50 for zoning, if we're at 75 for POUTs, and I get there's this whole philosophical argument about public benefit with the reliance on the tax levy, but I guess I fear having these discussions solely at ERC if there isn't sort of this general philosophy that the county has about cost recovery. Because what we might believe is appropriate cost recovery for all of our programs, which again, we've looked into this already. Like, how am I supposed to know whether or not somebody in another department is doing their job?
I think that's a really good question. That I think is the benefit of moving beyond a system where they're just happening at the Park Commission or just at Solid Waste or the Board of Health, to getting that knowledge up to the full county board, I think is helpful to do exactly what you just said. I think in a lot of areas we've been doing very well with, like Jamie said, at Park Commission, they look at them every year, and it's a lot easier to raise the price of a permit by CPI or the cost of a cup of coffee than to wait 15 years and have to increase it $30. Like, that's
Sure.
harder for the public to understand and I guess tolerate accept, for lack of a better word. So through our process of putting this in the budget, as I said, every year I want to include it as an appendice. So you see those fees and you can see those changes over time. I think that's the benefit. It also allows at least it in theory allows the other members of the county board to overcome that fear that you just said. Well, we're having the conversations, is everyone else? At least you'll be able to see the document with all the fees listed. And in some departments, I'll tell you, we don't have a lot of opportunity, and We recover 100% of our costs for the things that we're allowed to. Highway is a perfect example. As Jamie alluded to in terms of job costing and job tracking, they have to do that to a degree that I don't think anyone would wish upon another human. And then we bill the state for it, and we get reimbursed our full cost of what it is to do business. We don't rent out equipment to the public. They don't reserve sites like Jamie does, where you need to worry about, private sector competition, private campgrounds, where people can take their business elsewhere. We are in charge of county roads, and the state pays us to maintain state roads. So it's complex because you have some departments where they have to balance a lot of the things you've talked about with the private sector mentality. As Dave's pointed out, people can take their garbage, their refuse elsewhere. So that department has to balance that. Jamie, similarly, has to balance campground reservations. If you live in a county zone town and you don't like the zoning fee, you might, to your point, have towns drop out of county zoning, but there's not another conservation planning and zoning department to which you can bring your permit application, your permit application, I should say. Again, I know that was a long rambling answer. I do think we're doing a good job. I will share my assessment of these conversations at the other standing committees. They're very similar. There's not this, oh my gosh, look at this nugget that we found. It's a program that no one really likes, doesn't confer value, and costs a lot of money.
Not mandated.
Yeah. Yeah, they would be mandated. That's a good point. Very good point. But there's not that low-hanging fruit. So I guess you can take that as a positive thing. Your predecessors on the county board, I think, have done well.
So, and again, I guess maybe a better question would be, what have we historically been doing to look for efficiencies in these departments? Because we brought up a couple of things, and it looks like they've already been prioritized by administration. Like the 31 and 33, that really sticks out in my mind. And I'm not saying that there can't I'm not saying that there can't be improvements, because there can be. We're tasked with looking at that as stewards of taxpayer funds. I fully respect that. I guess I'm just looking at what is the baseline then, as far as what our departments have been doing. And to Director Polly's point, they have basically a work plan already in place with that tax levy document that they provided today.
So I'll give you the playbook I have with individual department heads, and it's kind of what was laid out in my budget message last year. Like Jamie referenced, what are we contracting for right now? Are there opportunities for us to do that in-house? Jamie referenced working with the highway department, strengthening our relationships internally to do more partnerships, whether it's at the Parks Department with Parks working with the city DPW, Department of Public Works, to make sure that we're procuring things at the lowest cost possible. I mean, it wasn't all that long ago that conservation, planning, and zoning were 3 separate departments. And we've identified, hey, these things work together, these departments work together a significant amount. How can we partner? I mean, one of the things that I've tasked Chris with, and it's with Jamie and with Dave, with Highway, and Facilities, is really take a look at think broadly more around the lines of public works. If we have an electrician in the Parks Department, we have electrical work we need done in Facilities. We plow snow. 3 departments plow snow. Well, is that the way we want to go, or can we have, certainly I don't think anyone wants to take over plowing the streets, so Highway is going to still keep doing that. But, with our various facilities, can we identify opportunities for consolidation, much like what was the genesis of our Parks Department doing the city's work? We split capital costs. We don't have to maintain as many mowers as we would if we had to cut if there was county grass and city grass, and never the two shall meet. I think those are the operational things that staff are looking for all the time. the hard work for the county board is, again, the policy questions that Chair Robinson laid out. What programs or services do we deliver, at what cost, at what level, and at what cost? I mean, those are harder, more amorphous.
Okay. Well, I mean, these discussions aren't going to go away because I think we're tasked with having them for the rest of the, for the rest of the summer into the fall with budget discussions. But is there anything else for today's discussion from the committee?
Covered a lot.
Sure. Well, I appreciate everybody's input. So, yes.
If I could just add one thing just to follow up, I thought I would point this out to the committees is, in my experience so far with the rest of the department heads, and there's a lot of us when we meet, in the conversations I've had and trying to do more partnership based on just my past experience, and it's been very successful. I talked with Lori quite a bit. I talk with all the department heads when we have projects that we can do together. I think right now I'd like to say, I guess, that you have a very good department head group for the county. We have a lot of new faces, but in my experience so far, everybody's been really open to working together and seeing how we can collaborate more than silos. I have a lot of stories from some of my seasoned staff or even some other departments that say, oh, back in the day, you would have never done this with our department because it was me. And I don't see that in my department. I haven't seen that working with other departments, and it's been really fun. It's more fun for all the departments to be able to work together. But I think right now we have a really good group of department heads that's willing to do that cross-training. And there isn't as many silos as from what I hear there was, but I only have the experience the last 5 years. So I think that's a benefit.
Okay, anything else for today? All right. Moving on to 8, next meeting, June 27, 2023, 3 p.m., Assembly Room, future agenda items. A, committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. B, announcements, requests, correspondence. 1, Mike Ritter's appointment to the Wisconsin Land and Water Board of Directors. Mike said he wanted to do an acceptance speech, and I was going to give him about 15 minutes. So
I think Kirsty also wanted to say something. If
Sure,
that's okay.
sure.
Oh,
okay. Well, Rick, you go first.
For a future agenda item, as we all know that affordable housing in our county is getting to be how would you say, an item that everybody wants answers from. And trying to do this affordable housing, I would like to just review the lot size for the county. What is the county zoning's lot size and requirements? Just so that maybe can we downsize our lot size or not? That's to make the housing a little affordable instead of buying a 5 or 10 acre lot. I would just like to review it.
Okay. Somebody else. Kirsty? Yeah, Kirsty, why don't you and Mike go now?
Did you have something to say first?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Suraj Shrinsky. Sorry.
That's okay. I think one other thing that, and I don't know how we go about doing this because it's a chicken and an egg process, but we can see coming forward with the West Side Master Plan, we can see the whole issue about the ice rink becomes a real, that's going to be a big issue. And it may end up being a catastrophic one at some point. We don't know. But I think that's one that we need to start getting our arms around in terms of what is the actual usage, what is the cost of providing that usage, what is the level of support in the community in terms of, what are they willing to pay, what are our options for sponsorship, for collaboration within the community. You can look at the Greenheck Field House, the Turner Center coming, so there's all sorts of issues there, but I see that one as being, a big project coming at some point that we have to decide, are we or are we not going to continue to be in the ice business?
Okay. Now, Christy, go ahead.
No, you're good. I'll keep my comments to 60 seconds. Mike probably has something to say too, but I did just want to congratulate Supervisor Ritter and also just kind of explain the role that he has agreed to accept. So we have talked in the past at ERC meetings about the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association. If you guys can remember back to last spring when we were doing meetings, we'd have like a 2-minute educational video at the end of the meeting talking about, your role serving on a land conservation committee, which is what this committee is. So you are all members of Wisconsin Land and Water. So all 450 land conservation committee members in Wisconsin are members of this organization. And then there's about 400 land conservation department staff members like myself and my 7 coworkers. So there's almost 1,000 people that belong to this organization, and all 72 counties in Wisconsin are members of Wisconsin Land and Water. Wisconsin Land and Water also has a board of directors in which there are 8 land conservation committee members, so county board supervisors serving, and then there's also 8 conservation department employees. So there's 16 people on the board of directors. And for our north central area, which is comprised of 8 counties, we had our spring meeting a couple weeks ago, and we had voted to elect Supervisor Ritter, who I had previously talked to about, considering throwing his name into the hat, given his passion for conservation, given his experience with grazing and knowledge of soil health. We knew that he'd be a good fit. And so he received unanimous votes amongst everyone in the North Central Association. So he now serves on the board of directors for the state of Wisconsin, and Wisconsin Land and Water is a very powerful voice in Wisconsin and also in our state legislature. So it's a huge benefit to have Marathon County represented on this state board. And I'm really excited to see what Supervisor Ritter is going to do on the board. So congratulations and good luck.
No, that was kind of a no-brainer for me. I'm kind of excited because out of the 16-member board, I'm the only one on there that grazes cattle. So I will give voice to that. I've always believed it all starts with soil. Clean, healthy soil brings us clean, healthy water, which brings us a clean, healthy population. So this is a great opportunity for me to be a voice for grazers and for Marathon County. And with that, I got to go home and move my cows and see if I have any more calves.
All right. Well, congrats, Mike. All right. Anything else? If not, I'll take number 9. Motion by Seefeld, second by Drebeck. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, staff.